All right. Hello and welcome to the 2020 Extra Life Writers Podcast with Ajax, the author of A Different Kind of War.
I'm Liberty Prime, also Gomez is my fanfiction name. I do Hope and Healing and Teleology.
I'm Petrificus Somewhatus. I'll be called Petrie during this. I wrote Daphne Greengrass and the Importance of Intent and Hermione Granger and the Paradigm Shift.
I'm Salient. I wrote Harry Potter and the International Triwizard Tournament and half of Sal-Tal.
And I'm Taliesin 19, and I wrote Grey Young with Me and also the other half of Sal-Tal Studios.
All right, starting off on our first topic, dialogue. What elements do we believe go into writing dialogue? If anyone would like to take the question first.
For me personally, I think the biggest part of it is people don't talk in paragraphs in long flowing epic monologues. People stutter, people stop and start, people have trouble with their words, they start talking and stop, particularly Harry. So that's number one for me. It needs to sound natural and it needs to be a back and forth for the first to even have a good starting point.
I'd agree. And to kind of add a little bit to that is different people have certain, it comes with like character voice, but certain ways they say things, they'll repeat it throughout a story. It's part of the voice. Word choice, like I don't remember what I used one time when explaining it, but like Hermione's might say like quite tired, where Ron would say knackered or something like that. So word choice is a big part of it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in terms of character voice, one thing that I think is like a good goal to have is if you were to take away all dialogue tags, and like with the names, Harry said or Hermione said, and just leave it pure dialogue, you should somewhat be able to kind of differentiate who's speaking. And that's done like how, Petrie was saying, like Harry especially kind of has a lot of with like those interjection words like and the ellipses and all that stuff. So I think that definitely makes it a lot more authentic to kind of have it, because people don't speak the same in real life. So you should never have your characters talking in the same kind of using the same words or even the same slang. And that's especially true like in terms of like the Britishisms and like the British slang and stuff. Like I think it's sometimes overdone because you have a lot of characters using bloody hell, for example, or a blimey or whatever. But in reality, like maybe Hermione wouldn't say that. It would just be Ron, or it would just be Hermione or Harry. So it's important to kind of, differentiate that way.
Yeah, when I wrote Intent, for some reason I was obsessed with the word brilliant. So pretty much every character said it at some point in every chapter, and I don't know what I was thinking, but I remember going back and rereading it, and it was like you do the control find to find all the word, and brilliant was everywhere, and it was horrifying. So again, as Tal just said, people don't say the same word. Not everybody says the same words over and over again. Think about those sorts of things.
Yeah, I'd say on a more technical level too, about what dialogue should actually be achieving and the goal that it's pursuing, as in dialogue should probably propel the plot forward for starters, and ideally try and show the readers something they haven't seen before and give them a little bit of an insight into furthering that character. I think probably the best thing about that too would be not trying to use your characters as a voice piece, or a mouthpiece rather, off the bat, and letting them speak for themselves, so to speak. And I think probably the best way that you could do that is arguing with yourself, as schizophrenic as that sounds. I think possibly the best way that you can develop dialogue is having those discussions with yourself and seeing what sounds natural to you. Because when you put words on a page, you inevitably lose the aspect of speaking them and having that conversation.
Yeah, I think I think that's a really good point. I don't like, and it is kind of weird. You said like schizophrenic a little bit, but actually saying the dialogue out loud is something I do a lot. Um, just because it should kind of play out like a scene, obviously. Um, and sometimes when you say the word out loud, it's a much different experience than reading it on the page, and you kind of hear what sounds more natural, or what's like maybe too wordy, if you can't say it like verbally, that could indicate that maybe you should simplify a little bit. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
I have the roll your eyes test, which essentially is if you were sitting in the room listening to this conversation and you heard this person giving this massive declaration of love the way they did it, would you think, oh, that's really sweet? Or would you roll your eyes and say, no one talks that way? Think about that. As Tao said, say it out loud. And the other thing is, remember, especially because you're talking about children in the Harry Potter series, the students will talk differently amongst each other than they do to the adults. I think a lot of fan fiction, Harry Potter fan fiction, hits a snag with Harry because they age up Harry and he's giving speeches to Dumbledore, McGonagall, et al. From the off, and that's not how it works. So I know some people like that. That's great, but if you're talking about dialogue, is that realistic? Is it well written? That's the question. So just think about that. It's not only the person talking, but who they're talking to.
Yeah, I think, for me, when I'm trying to write any kind of dialogue, I just try and picture it in my head and hear it from the characters' specific voices. And then, like Tal said, just reading it out loud to yourself, you can really kind of hear the different characters' voices as well as whether it sounds really weird or not that's coming out. So just trying to have it in my head what's going on and what they're saying back and forth, and just picturing like other people or people you specifically know that have a similar characterization. Like, is that something that kind of person says? Because that's a pretty good character test.
I think it does bring up an interesting train of thought in that, especially with speeches, the idea of being a bit more economical with your words and letting characters say less rather than more.
Yeah, definitely. I think just avoiding speeches in general is probably a good bet, because if you think about it, none of us really have monologues in real life. It's just not something that happens. And I think that can be helped by using dialogue tags and using movements, like what are the characters doing while they're talking, it brings the scene to life. They're not just like cardboard cutouts that are sitting there talking to each other. They're doing things, maybe they're sighing, maybe they're grabbing something, maybe they're sitting down. And that helps also to cut up the major paragraphs. You don't ever really want a paragraph of dialogue. It's just not going to read well.
And the last thing I'll say on this, but to what you guys were saying, sometimes people do speak in paragraphs, or they do give a speech or go on long. They speak for a long time, but those are important moments, right? Those are important moments in life. So if your entire story is that way, you're not sending any signal to the reader that this is a unique situation. This is an important situation when this person is talking and I should be listening. It's all the same. It's all walls of speeches, and that's not how real life works.
Well, you probably have an interesting take in this regard, Petri, because compared to all of us, you write shorter stories. And I think, especially with dialogue, there's a brevity there that's difficult to get your point across, which is why a lot of people tend to write longer stories. And I think that's especially prevalent when we're talking about dialogue, because you've got less room to say what you need to say with more importance on what's being said. So how do you kind of
Right.
strike that balance there?
Well, we'll talk about this a little later with the writing process, but anyone who's read what I've written, you can probably tell it's less is more. If you're not advancing the plot, if you're not advancing a characterization, if you're not advancing a relationship, it doesn't need to be there. So that's number one. And with dialogue, less is more. I mean, that's it. If you look at something, I just cannot read. I cannot write flowery dialogue. It's not in me because I don't talk that way. It might seem like it is the way I'm rambling here, but stick to the story you're telling. Right. That's the key to me. That's where the dialogue comes from. And I will say this: if you have trouble with that, and I think if you really want to do it, work at it. Write your story, write that chapter down, and then go back and try to read through it, look at that dialogue, and think: is there a way I can say this in less words? Is there a way I can say this not through words but through action? And change it, edit it, because what it is now, and this is how it is for me, it's muscle memory. So the amount of time I'm going back and reviewing what I wrote from the beginning, it's night and day for me. Less is more always, because the good stuff gets lost if it's overwhelmed with other stuff. So I don't know if that answered the question, but that's the best I got.
Yeah. Well, they brought up an interesting point there too, in that saying what you need to be said via other means. Expounding on that, what about dialogue tags?
So can I say something about that real quick?
Go for it.
This is going to embarrass Tal, but Lily, Harry's daughter in Grow Young with Me. If you're not familiar with the story, Ginny has died and he's entering into a new relationship. The children are young, so that's an awkward thing. At no point, I don't believe, does Lily, I think, how old is she, Tal?
She's 4.
At no point does she say, I hope she's my mommy, or I hope she comes over and I miss mom and I hope she's my new mommy. She never says anything like that. But throughout her actions, whenever Abby is there, going to her, holding her hand, wanting to spend time with her, getting upset when the boys take her attention, she's screaming to the reader, I miss my mom and I don't have this sort of relationship. And it's all there. And Lily never says a word. It's all there with actions. And it's fantastic. So,
Oh, thank you.
you're welcome.
Would anyone else like to talk on the topic of dialogue tags?
Yeah, this is actually something me and Sal were discussing the other day, and Naz, who is a beta that we have help us time to time. The difference, there's a stylistic difference, I think, between me, for example, I like to use said 99% of the time, like said Harry, said Hermione, blah blah blah. Sal, on the other hand, likes to use more different kinds of words, like asked, exclaimed, suggested, whatever. And I think it is kind of a stylistic choice. I don't know objectively which one is right or which one is wrong, but I think for me, the reason I like to use said all the time is because I feel like dialogue tags in general should be something that are more invisible to the reader. Naturally, when we read, I think that our eyes kind of skim over the dialogue tags to get to the dialogue. And it's kind of, for me, I like to use them as more of a pause in the dialogue. You know, it's just like, okay, I'm going to the store, Harry said, grabbing his keys or whatever. Not that he has keys, but you get the point. And then to continue the dialogue. And I feel like when you use words that aren't said, it, especially like more unique ones, asked is also kind of more invisible, but when you use those more unique words, I feel like it grabs your eyes more, and therefore the point of the dialogue tag is kind of it just kind of takes on its own purpose, which again, and this is just my opinion, as like stylistically, I feel like dialogue tags should be more things that you skim over. And that's, I think, an interesting thing to maybe debate, I don't know, but the use of, because Nas, for example, had said that, or Nazi, sorry, has said that it could get repetitive. using said all the time, which I can see that side as well. So maybe you guys can talk about how you use dialogue tags, what words, if you use them the same way I do, if you use it differently. Yeah, so that's just my point of view, though.
Well, I was actually doing a bit of beta work for Autumn Souls, and then she explained this to me because actually I didn't really know what dialogue tags were. Because like I know ITT is been going on for almost 2 years here now, but I haven't done creative writing ever before prior to it. So like maybe grade school or something, like some kind of English assignment. So it's been a long time for me to do anything. So like dialogue tags, I've never even heard of it. And then she explained to me about kind of how like asked, replied, and specifically said generally the readers gloss over, and you want to take the usage off of the dialogue tag and more onto their actions and onto their words, the important parts of the scene. And then if you use them when you're supposed to be using them, it's like you use them occasionally for emphasis. Like if they are yelling, which is very rare that somebody actually physically yells in real life, like when they're yelling, then when you're saying they're yelling instead of using said, it is now like an obvious cue to the reader there's something different here. So that's kind of what I understood from what she had said and with my own supplemental reading as well. And so I've kind of changed my way of writing a little bit because of that and just what I've learned.
So to kind of piggyback on Sal, I also had to train myself out of the non-standard, said and all that, because when I very, very first started, and they were some of the first posted that I since went back and edited. I think I had like one or two seds in the whole like first few chapters, and I've talked to people about it because I've done a lot of like Sal said, supplemental reading, podcast listening, just all sorts of stuff about writing, just because I really enjoy it. And so many people were taught in school, and I remember distinctly being told, "Don't use said; it's boring. There's better ways to get across what you want to say. So if somebody's yelling, put yelled. If somebody's asking a question, put asked. Like straight up told, don't use these things. Whereas what they then didn't tell us is that you can even better show that through action, show that through body language, show that through what they're not saying. If the reader knows that they have information that they should tell the other person and they don't, I mean, that's a huge indicator of what the character's feeling without any sort of tag at all. So I have come squarely into the camp of said, but it was a lot of hard work to make that the standard after many, many years and many, many years of reading fan fiction, because it's often not the standard in fan fiction.
So, fun fact, I didn't know what dialogue tags were until 2 days ago when we were discussing the podcast, and Sal and Ajax explained it to me. So they told me Cal did it, and I go, she doesn't do that. Sure, she mixes it up, and then I went back and looked at the last chapter, and I'll be damned, she does it every time. So I actually I don't use said very much. I use action words. And personally, it speaks to the writing. If it's good, you don't notice it. When I notice it is if people use said and they use adverbs all the time with said, what said angrily, that sort of thing. That's what sticks out to me. In Tal's example, that's not what she did.
That's a great point.
Harry said grabbing his keys, right? He's in a hurry. He didn't say hurriedly and hurried out the door. The adverbs is where it gets lost, and that's where I had that weakness at the beginning, and that's something that I work on now. So I'm good either way. If you don't notice it, then either way is right, because the author's getting across what they want, showing, not telling.
That's true. Adverbs we joke about adverbs being my thing, but like within the prose, like I still struggle with adverbs. And but luckily
we're here for you, Liberty. We're here for you.
I know. But I don't, and it's actually something that's in Harry Potter. If you go back and look, like JKR really hammers
Mm-hmm.
the adverbs along with the dialogue. There's, and everything we're saying, there's nothing wrong in moderation, but it is the most noticeable, tagged on to dialogue.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point about adverbs, and also, Petrie, what you said, that you're right. I think that the point of writing in general, I think, is you never want to make the reader see kind of the writing. You want it to be such an easy flowing uh, process that they don't even remember that they're reading words in a way. Um, and I think that when you use those, like, whether it's adverbs, whether it's like just the telling versus the showing, that's a huge thing that people talk about, but it's really true that you want emotions to come across and images to come across in a way that you're not slamming it in their faces. It should be something that is just natural. Like, you know what a person looks like when they're in a hurry, you know what a person looks like when they're stressed or sad or angry. And whether you use said, whether you don't use said, whether you use adverbs, even, like, there's ways to do them correctly, and there's ways that it's just like very not subtle. And I think writing is just all about subtlety, and it's not an easy thing. I mean, I in my first story, I joke about hating it a lot. I mean, it's not a joke, it's true, but it's still I keep
What
it
is
up.
that called again? What is that story called?
It's called a memoir, and it's still up on Fanfiction. And I don't mind that it's still up. I think it's a good way to show progress. I use adverbs a lot in that story. I use non-said action words a lot. It's a lot of telling over showing. But that's every writer kind of goes through it. It's, when you're first starting, I think it's just natural. Like, you can't know all this stuff right away. It goes through lots. You read a lot, you read other people's works a lot, you listen to these, writing podcasts or articles about writing, and you learn these things. And it's just a process you have to go through.
And I will tell you, there's nothing better than reading over your own stuff and going, wow, I did use a lot of adverbs. Wow, I did use this word again. That's how you get better. Again, it really is muscle memory. I think that's probably one of the best things about using said, because you get into a pattern and a system where you can expand out. You set your parameters and you can expand from that.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
Petrie rose a particularly good point before, in that stylistically it's your choice to make, but if you can convey the information you need to convey, said certainly has a ubiquitousness to it, but if you start off with said, you're on the ground level. Everywhere from there is up, whereas there's no use trying to build the fourth floor when you haven't got the second. So
That is deep. Wow, thank
you
you.
need to try and strike that balance between not overloading the reader by sifting through adverbs. Even
Yeah.
if you need to, you can write the thing in its entirety and then go back and see, could I say something else through this? And that's probably the most apt way to do it when you're learning, because when you're writing dialogue, probably I'd suggest getting what you need to say said first and then worry about saying everything else behind that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know we have other topics, so I don't want to spend so much time on this one, but one last thing I'll say about dialogue is that using people's names, that's something that I always try to avoid, because naturally when we speak, we don't say, like, oh, I went to the store today, Sal. Like, you don't, unless, like, you will occasionally use words or names, but I feel like they should be used for emphasis. When you're feeling a particularly strong emotion, it's, instead of going like, good morning, Ginny, how are you? I'm good, Harry, how are you? It's just not a natural way to talk. And I think people tend to, or at least writers who are just starting, tend to use um, the characters' names a lot, as if we're going to forget who's talking to who, but we're not. And I think it just sounds unnatural.
And to follow up with that whole sequence you said there, that was a waste of dialogue, right?
Exactly.
As he enters the kitchen.
Yes.
Just go from there, right?
Well,
That's how you write a $75,000
I
story.
couldn't think of dialogue on the spot, so sorry.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It speaks to what you're talking about,
yeah,
right?
yeah, no, definitely.
Well, moving forward from dialogue tags and into the realm of character, which we discussed a little bit before, especially in saying things without particularly speaking, what do we feel makes a compelling character?
I always find when reading fan fiction that stories that have like two-dimensional characters are very, very boring very quickly. And even three-dimensional characters, I mean, people in real life are human beings. They don't just do something because of a single reason or like, just they have a specific motivation. Like Voldemort's just an evil person, period. Like there's a whole history to him of 15, 16 years of him going into that kind of, I'm going to become I am Lord Voldemort. It's like not, 15 to 16, suddenly you make that decision. Like there's a whole lot to it. The character motivations are very complex. So when you read stories, at least when I read stories or fan fiction, and it's like characters are just making very simple decisions for very simple specific reasons, or when you have people are going to talk about what they're thinking and then they do exactly that, and it's only like a specific reason or two. They don't take into the fact that there's been what's the character's background, what's been going on with their history, where they're from, what kind of viewpoint where they have that's different than the other character that's looking into it. I find it's very boring very quickly that these characters are just so flat, as they say. They don't have emotion versus, when you have characters that have multiple dimensions and you kind of look at all of those different things, like what would they think, what they feel, their history, what kind of, if they've had a previous relationship like this, how would that affect this current one? When you think more like that, then it becomes much more complex for your characters. And more complex characters are much more interesting characters, in my opinion. The more interesting, the more complex their actions are, or you can't exactly guess, do they do this because of this or because of that? Already the reader's engaged in thinking. Are they what's going on here? They're thinking about your character and they're more engaged. So making characters compelling, you want to make them feel real and natural. But for me, one of the largest things with fan fiction is just you want them to feel like they're real people, that they're not just a cardboard cutout with 3D that you've just taken Michael Jordan off your wall and thrown him into the story as a superstar Quidditch player. That's not very interesting.
So
real characters have strengths and weaknesses. Not everyone is good at everything. And if they're going to be good at something, show the progression. The whole point of a story is character growth, right? And again, we all know this. Everybody listening to this that reads Harry Potter fan fiction knows the instant level up Harry Potter stories. Talking about Sal's story, Harry is leveling up in that story, but he's leveling up. He's progressing through the story. Sal is telling that story of him coming into its own. He's not leveling up in one chapter, chapter two, and he still has his weaknesses. That's the key. As he said, it's more than one dimension.
So it's a good thing you went first, because what I was about to say kind of applies to both those things. And something I'll probably reference more than once is a lecture series that I watched, because like I said, I just like to consume writing information. That's why I subscribe to master classes and things like that. But so Brandon Sanderson has this very
The Sandman.
yeah, him.
Yeah.
He has a very, like, I'd almost call it sterile way of developing characters. He's got this 3 slider system, and I'm not going to go into it because I'd butcher it. His lectures are free on YouTube, so if you want to see exactly what I'm talking about, you can find it. But to the strengths and weaknesses part, with what he talks about with the sliders is that if you're going to start 2 of them high, the third one's going to be low. If somebody's really capable, and they're probably not going to be maybe super compassionate or even super smart, they just might be really good at this one thing. And then something else he says was to what Sal was saying, is you can kind of get away with a boring plot if you've got good characters. If you've got a good plot and 2-dimensional characters, people aren't going to stick around, really.
Yeah, I agree with everything basically, and something I'll add is that in terms of making characters realistic, you have to think about um, the fact that as human beings, we're not very cut and easy. You know, we have contradictions. We feel a certain way and then act a different way. We sometimes aren't aware of a lot of what's inside of us. We don't know what makes us do things, and we figure it out maybe as life goes on. And I think that's a great thing to add into stories. You know, your characters are going to start, like Liberty said, your characters are going to start at one spot and end at a very different spot. Or I think somebody said that, Petrie maybe. But that's, character growth is extremely important to a story, especially a character driven story, which I happen to think all stories should be character driven in a way. But you you have to have them, through the experiences of the story, come to certain, realizations or small epiphanies here and there that this person that they were at the beginning of the story would never have imagined they would know about themselves or would discover. And it's just, it's a part of being human. We don't know ourselves that well, and that's okay. But that's what life is about, is that self-reflection, going through things that change us. And back to what Sal was saying too, that we all start from somewhere. We have a history. And even with characters that, whether they're canon characters, whether they're OCs, you have to have a history for them from however young they are to however old they are. Every person has a history and a personality and motivations, and insecurities is a big thing too. You have to treat them as people and not just a plot device. It's not just getting a person from A to B. It's okay, what are the struggles that's going to make the plot complicated? What are those little zigzags that you have to get through before you get to point B?
I do want to say real quick, just on the back of what Tal said, with character growth, and people being people, is we as people can draw the wrong conclusions. Like somebody can go through an event and learn the wrong thing, um, and and then moving forward, that needs to inform what they do. So it's not always like a linear upscale of growth. You might take 2 steps forward and 1 back, or 1 to the side. People don't always see what's best for them, and they might um, just draw the wrong conclusion and then run with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Sometimes people need to learn something twice.
Expanding off of that, I feel like personally a big part of it too is the relatability aspect of it, where when you're writing a character, you're operating within, the human spectrum of emotions. And that's by no means the spectrum of polarity. So you've got everything within a person to play with. By going to, saying Voldemort, for instance, is instantly all dark and there's no relatability to him, he sort of fails as a villain, because even though you're not supposed to sympathize with him, there should be an element to him where you can go, I can see where he's coming from, even if it's the wrong place. Because I think the easiest way that you can lose people in writing characters is, like all that you said, is when you can look at someone and go, well, there's nothing that I can look at him, or look at them rather, and say, there's no part of me in that person. And again, personally, I feel like when you read a character, if I can't see any aspect of a human within that character, or if they're a caricature of what a human is, you lose people very quickly, which I feel like is probably a failing of a lot of stories, is that you lose yourself in making Harry on the other side too, this idealistic light boy, for lack of a better term, and you kind of lose what makes people human in that pursuit, in that now you've got him there, but there's no growth. You can't go anywhere from being on one end of the spectrum except inwards. And if you take yourself from that end of the spectrum, well, then you lose whatever you were trying to say.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of going off what you said about the villains, that's definitely completely true. I obviously don't have villains that really in my story. I don't have a actual villain, but I think that even in terms of your main characters, the opposite is true. You should make them unlikable at times. They should do things that you find stupid and that make you really pissed off, or, you know, I think a character should never be they should never make the right choices all the time, because again, it's not realistic. And I think it's more interesting when two characters have a conflict and they fight. And in my opinion, I think the most interesting dialogue, kind of going back to dialogue, but the most interesting dialogue is when there is some kind of conflict, because that's when a lot of the character elements come out. Um, so it's, yeah, even like, going as far as the kids, you know, whenever I read a story about kids, I like it when I see them acting out and not being these perfect angels, because that's anybody with children. Sal, I'm sure, can attest, and Petri. They are not angels at all, like 99% of the time. But that's what makes them lovable, because they're so, you know, when you read them, and you in real life, you love them. And when you read them, you love them because they're human beings, and just like
They
adults,
wear their emotions on their sleeve. They wear their emotions
yeah,
on their sleeve. It's exactly. That's
yeah,
exactly it. That's Lily in your
yeah,
story. She doesn't say it. She shows it.
yeah. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Stop making me blush. But yeah, no, it's true, and I think that's what makes characters interesting, is when they just do things that you don't necessarily agree with or like, but that's what makes the story or the characters compelling.
So I know we probably want to move on, but one more specific thing. If you're writing Harry Potter, what I see so often is there's so many small bits and bits of lore that are unexplored or only explored on a surface level. We've all talked about Daphne, and some people don't understand why she's a compelling character. And I've never understood that just because of the lip. She's never in the books, that's true. But she's a member of the Sacred 28. She has a family blood curse, for peace sake. Her sister is dying, right? She obviously stays quiet at Hogwarts. That's a character trait. Harry
Mhm.
never notices her. What does that mean? These are all things. If you want to write a story, think about that. How would Astoria's curse affect her? How would it affect Astoria? How would it affect her parents? The decisions they make, how they act. It's all there. Uh, there's a good template for people if they want to go that way.
We'll probably
By the
cover
way,
off.
read Daphne Greengrass and the Importance of Intent. I nail that so hard in that story. Sorry, go ahead.
He does. He does. Yeah, he's spoken glowing words about my story, so it's my turn to say, and this is completely genuine, that he it's amazing, and he does write completely compelling characters, and that it's one of the only stories that I've read where Harry remains, or all the characters remain completely true to their canon characterizations, and yet um, go in a completely different direction. So that takes extreme talent.
You
Further
hear that,
evidence of
guys?
this.
Extreme talent. That's what she said. The
Mm-hmm.
author agreed with me. Thank you, Kyle.
For other
You're
evidence of
very
this, I would
welcome.
also read Tal's work, a memoir.
Okay, let's. I
All right,
just bashed it earlier, so.
all right.
Oh, and
Well, moving on
I'm
from that.
sure Liberty, Ajax, and Sal also have very compelling characters. But you know, anyway, continue.
No, don't double down.
Dang.
Um, moving on from what makes a compelling character, I think also a big part of that is probably separating that character's voice from everyone else's. So, what would you say goes into making your character's voice distinct?
I think we touched on this a lot with dialogue, because obviously the two are going to go hand in hand most there. Um, but action as well. To be honest, part of your character's voice is it's just their personality, and consistent decisions. Consistency really is the key to voice. Like I said earlier, like word choice, They're not going to, months apart in the storyline. They're going to maybe say the same thing the same way. They're going to do the same things, maybe not exactly, but true to the way they make decisions. And I'd say probably ideally, if you've got a character voice and a character personality really well, even if the plot beats are a surprise to the reader, the character's decisions won't be. The reader's never going to go, oh, why did you do that? They'll go, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. See Harry going into the forest, that choice is part of his character and his voice. So yeah, I'd say it's mostly in dialogue, but also in action and decision.
And again, if you're writing Harry Potter characters, you have 7 books that you can read passages of the characters that you may be using to learn their dialogue, to learn their inflections, to learn what they say. And I will say this, if you read the books 5 years ago and you go, oh, I know how they talk, read it. Read it. Right before you're getting ready to write something that takes place during the years that's close to canon, read that passage, that part of the book. Read how they talk. Read what's going on. It helps.
Anyone else like to take the
One thing, yeah, I'll add one thing. Liberty covered like dialogue and action. Definitely, I agree with that. And in general, I think if you're writing from two different perspectives, like for my story, I do Harry and Abby, and if your story you do multiple perspectives, I think you should always aim to have those perspectives feel a little bit different. And I think that's done through, again, like Liberty was saying, just how does the character behave? What choices do they make? How do they think? I think just as a small example, Abby tends to be more of an optimistic person. Harry is more of a pessimist, and it's not. I don't feel like it's a huge difference in POVs, but I do try my best to create that kind of subtle difference. In like when you're in one person's head versus the other, like Harry's chapters or segments of the chapter, you tend to be a little bit more. I try to make them a little bit more like, I don't know what the word is, but not low key, but yeah, whatever. It's slightly different versus Abby's is a little bit more like upbeat. So that's something to think about when you're writing two POVs is how are you going to make sure that you're not just like reading it, it feels like the same character. And that goes with dialogue and that goes with action and everything, but it's just like a generalized overall thing.
So I do want to jump in real quick. I know I already talked, but to exactly what Tal was saying, is for character POV, like they'll notice different things. And the example that actually jumped to mind first was in her story. Abby notices like Harry's hair and eyes mostly. Harry doesn't notice those things really about Abby. And so the things they're looking at, the things they consider, and in the prose, when you're in their mind, the things they're thinking about, about the world around them and how it references other things in their life. Like Harry's chapters in her story, he might wonder if if she's figuring things out, whereas Abby might just see him as being a little surly. Like if you're doing your voice well in a POV chapter, they're noticing different things about the same world.
Aw.
I think,
but yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for using my story. Anyway, carry on.
Tal brought up a good point before when we were talking about dialogue, and it is if you strip the story of prose and tags, if you can still see the difference between dialogue and you can accurately pick out who's saying what, well, then you're getting along the right lines rather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great exercise for anybody, especially people because dialogue doesn't come naturally to everybody and prose doesn't come naturally. So whatever your strength is, I think if dialogue isn't your strength, then that's a good exercise to use.
And coming off of that, when you're crafting your story, how much
I
do
like
you
that word, crafting. That's what I do. I craft it like an artisan. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
when you're crafting your story? How much do you listen to your characters over trying to push the plot forward by yourself? In that, do you ever stop and think, well, no, this is not what they're going to do, so the story needs to take a different direction to how I've written it now?
I went first before somebody else go.
Sal, say something.
I'm pretty sure on the first one of the recent ones, but characters going different directions in the plot. I mean, that's definitely happened to me when I'm writing. Sometimes I have a scene in my head and then I just start writing it, and the character's just like, this is not going to work. I don't do these things, or I don't. It's just not happening between two characters. I mean, I'll come and say something that's a little bit funny. But when I first started writing ITT, I mean, there's three potential love interests, and the reason there's three, like that was intentional from the beginning, not because I expected three people, three all in the end. It was like, okay, I don't know if I'm any good at writing romance or like characters to fit together, so let's have three opportunities to figure this out, and maybe one of them will work. So that's kind of how it went for me, and I set the plot side of things completely separate from like the romance side. That if none of them worked out, then whatever, there's still going to be a story here, and if all of them worked out, well, I could probably figure a way to make that work too with the plot. So that was more the character decisions and trying. I mean, flirt with the first person to kind of get to know Harry quite well, and so that was, or sorry, Natalia was, and that's kind of where they to see their characters worked, and some of the early scenes seemed to work between the two characters, and that kind of led towards other things. And then Fleur, same thing. I tried to write more like a older sister kind of vibe to it, and it just it wasn't happening. So that was that, and that's and I've done that with other characters too, where I was trying to write them, and they just did not listen to what I wanted them to do. They went their own direction, and you just pivot with it and go. And my plot was pretty robust and not really going to get broken by any of the minor things like that. I mean, the character progression and stuff was the important part for my plot, so I wasn't really ever going to be too worried about it if the characters went one way and I was thinking a different one. I just roll with it, whatever feels natural for that character, because as you write the character, you're kind of feeling like, I don't know, I try and get in their head when I'm writing it, like what kind of decisions are they making or how are they thinking. Well, if your character doesn't want to go the way you're thinking for plot, well, that's probably not a good decision to do, to try and force them to each other. It's probably going to come out very awkward and stilted.
So, time to praise Tal for a second.
Oh, Jesus.
I think it is a genuine skill to write three potential love interests that are all compelling and unique, and you can see why Harry is attracted to them and has a relationship with it. I couldn't do it. So, since Tal hasn't read it, I will say I've read it, and I'm extremely impressed by the depth of those three characters and the relationship with Harry.
Tal, the famous writer of ITT.
Exactly. But to the question,
I get us confused.
I have an actual example for this in Hermione Granger in the Paradigm Shift. It takes place in 6 years, which we know no one's read it that's listening to this, but that's fine.
I plan to.
We all know that Draco. That's good job. I'm proud of you. It's good, right? Extremely talented. Anyways,
extremely talented. Just like not one extremely, you need two, I think, for this story. Because
that's fair.
I don't
all
like
caps.
Hermione pairings, and I actually read it, so that was quite the accomplishment.
Nice. But anyways, it takes place in 6 years, so we all know that's the year that Draco is plotting in the Room of Requirement. Well, essentially, what happens in the story is, spoilers, they find out that he's doing something, but they don't know what it is. And Draco is put on the spot. Essentially, the whole school knows he's up to something, and they're watching him. So all eyes are on him, and it's kind of switched from Harry being the one under the microscope to him being under the microscope. And the original plan was for him to come up with a plan and try to take out Hermione, Harry, or both. That was the plan. This happens later in the book or the story. And as I got closer and closer to what Sal was saying, Canon Draco, in my interpretation, wouldn't do that. What does Canon Draco do when he's backed into a corner and when he doesn't have the advantage? He doesn't fight. He runs. He backs away. So I went from having this epic confrontation to having him sneak out of the school because he was scared and didn't have any other options. And that was a huge one for me. It worked. I think it worked. You have to listen to what the characters are saying, so because then it doesn't become a Harry Potter story. You're just using the names, and that's where I think a lot of people stumble sometimes.
Yeah,
Ajax?
I think. Oh, were you doing to say something,
No,
Liberty?
no. Go ahead.
Oh, just really quick, I agree with that, and I think that that's kind of what differentiates people who use characters as plot devices and people who use characters as characters. That you can't just force them into the plot. They're gonna go different directions, and that's good because then you can see that your character has its own motivations that maybe you're not completely aware of when you get to a certain point in the story. You're like, oh wow, they've changed than what I expected, or I'm realizing that this isn't going to work. Like for me personally, I have a whole document of deleted scenes that are just stupid because they didn't work with the plot and the characters just what they were doing did not make sense. And I'm never going to use those scenes. I just have them for some reason, but yeah, and that's okay. That's I think it's a good sign when you listen to your characters.
So coming off of that, listening to your characters, how much of you would you say is transferred into your characters, either intentionally or unintentionally?
Before we move on, can I say something to the last topic real quick? Because I saved myself for last because I actually have two very different examples of the same thing almost. So yeah, before we move on about characters driving the plot is in teleology, I got 8 chapters in and realized that the characters that I had made, sort of specifically Daphne, just completely broke the plot because their relationship in both of my stories, the relationship is pretty key. So you can't you kind of can't get away with messing that up too much. And I got 8 chapters into sort of the pivotal point where they start to get together. And I'd made her so like genuinely unlikable that it didn't make sense. In absolutely no world would Harry like be, no matter how attractive she is, like be interested in moving forward with her. And I got to the scene where they get together and it just felt so wrong. And the whole story sort of hinged on that. So that's why I had to go back and like delete and start over. Because the characters just did not fit. The characters that I had did not fit the plot. And then in Hope and Healing, the Fleur that I made changed the timeline significantly. She realized at a certain point that she had feelings, and then in the original timeline, it wasn't until the following summer. So it was around Christmas when she realized, and then in summer they were going to kind of get together, and which I think was an attempt to deal with the age issue that you run into with that pairing. But I realized, like, as I was writing it, I was like, she's not gonna just sit around on her thumbs for that long and not do anything about it. It doesn't make any sense at all. And and oh, Ajax threw me off. But yeah, so she completely changed a huge part of the timeline. I had to stop writing the Christmas scene the first time around and rework how the rest of the story, the next like 6 months, we're going to go with them in a relationship. So yeah, spoilers for you guys who haven't read that story. Whatever. Everybody dies from the end. And so yeah, like I've had characters change the story and like destroy the story. So I had to change the characters.
I feel like this is probably one of the stronger points of discovery writing too, in that if you don't have an idea where you are going forward and you're riding off the seat of your pants, well, by virtue of doing that, your characters are always going to be the driving force, which is probably one of the bigger contrasts against the full story outline. But moving on, back to the question before, how much would you say, either intentionally or unintentionally, of you is reflected in your characters?
I'll go first with this because I get this a lot and it's understandable. I write an OC
not.
and I am I write an OC who is a female and I am a female. We are on the same age. And I know, gasp.
Are you talking about your self-insert?
What's that?
Your self-insert, Abby?
Yes, my
Yeah,
self-insert.
that's what I thought.
It's not Lily.
So people tend to think, and this is understandable again, that OCs a lot of the time are self-inserts. And a lot of the time they are. But it's very a person is very capable of writing a character without having them be a self-insert. And you know, she's not really anything like me, and I think everyone here might be able to agree with that to a certain extent.
Yeah, she's
What?
Abby is a joy.
yeah, she's funny too.
And I'm quite the opposite, so not funny and not a joy.
Abby is a joy. She's nothing like Tal.
But I think at the same time, though, it's also very okay to insert part of yourself into a character. And when, because you have to write characters realistically, and we are all human beings and we all react to some extent in similar ways to certain situations, whether it's big situations or small ones. And I like to compare this a lot to like observational comedy. The reason that it is so funny is because we connect so much with what the comedian is talking about. It's like, oh my God, that's me. And that's how I like to like that idea is kind of how I like to write characters, not even just Abby, but Harry too, anybody really. I put a lot of myself into Harry as well, and just like basically any character in the story, because they're all human beings just like me. So they're going to, they're going to react in the same situation that I might react in, and also just kind of figuring out like, okay, this is how I would act. How would this character act? Would it be the same? Would it be different? But there should be a level of familiarity with with whatever character you're reading. They should feel like a human being would react this way, and it's just thinking about that, like whether it's yourself or whether it's somebody around you, to base a character on. And also you go from there in changing that a little bit. Like just a tiny example, I play an instrument. I don't play piano, but I recognize and can connect with Abby's love for music, so I used that just because it was easy, and I wanted her to have a passion for something, so I thought, why not just make it something that's similar to mine? And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean she's a self-insert. It's just you write what you know to a certain extent, and even when you don't know something, you can research it, so it's not that big of a deal.
Petrie, how much of Daphne's Butterfly was you?
So much. You have no idea. The biggest part of me is this is probably obvious if you've read it, is I like to make jokes and I have a sense of humor in the dialogue. But other than that, I think that's it, because as Tal said, you take bits and pieces of yourself, of people you know, of what's in the books, and those are the characters. I'm drawn to stories about good people and supporting Harry, so that's what I write. I would say my writing style and what I write about and the plot is where my personality comes out more than a specific character.
I think it's also very surprising too about where unintentionally a lot of your personality goes into your character. Like, for instance, I was shocked at the start how much of me was in Fleur, because as we can tell, I am also a French woman. But I didn't really expect as much of me to come onto the page as it did. And I think that's probably a very good exercise in just how much you can write and not quite realize where you're going.
I agree. I found the first part of Hope and Healing was very, very discovery written. And then later on, I had a better idea, and now it's all outlined. I got shifted over to outlining hard because I'm too distractible. And in pretty much every character that's in the forefront is a little bit me. Some obviously more than others, but like I'm kind of all over the place in that story. Telio though, like hardly at all. Like Telio was for fun. I think if anything, Telio probably had more of my sense of humor, even though it didn't have a lot of jokes or anything like that. Just in like word choice and the way things happened and the situations. It just doesn't. Or I don't know why I said that. Yeah, I'm just not much in Telio, but I'm all over the place in Hope and Healing, so you can kind of go either way.
Yeah, I don't think there's a ton of me specifically in my characters. I mean, there's elements that you take from yourself or your understanding, but Harry's definitely not me and the decisions he makes and the type of things he chooses to do in specific situations. My OC obviously is not a self-insert, being a young female. And I did actually get a few PMs. People ask me about like what Salazar's writings say. Like, is that like my personal beliefs in there? And you know that goes back to the character too. Which there's not a ton of the character history written in the actual content, but for me, like there's a I know his history, like his whole life story kind of thing. And so when he's writing these things, like these were the things that were important to him based on his experiences in life. So they have nothing to do with my actual ethics or my personal beliefs about life and the meaning of what you should put important. Um, so yeah, I don't think there's a ton of me specific in my story at least.
All right. Well, taking a step back from the innards of writing, fan fiction as a whole is obviously what we're all here for. What would we say makes popular fan fiction?
Like, why is Importance of Intent so damn popular?
It's excellently written, but I will say this: if you this is just my opinion, if you made a Venn diagram of how to make something that's popular, intent, that's what I call it, just intent, one word, like Cher, Madonna, that sort of thing.
Capital I.
I was just yeah, exactly. I was just lucky because it checked all those boxes, right? It's Daphne Harry, which is very popular. When I started writing it, I was able to update it frequently. Every 3 to 4 days, I was putting out a new chapter. And I think the biggest one for me, amongst all that, the normal growth was folks on Reddit liked it. From what I've seen, and Tal has seen this too, it kind of becomes a self-perpetuating thing. If somebody recommends it on Reddit, more people read it, and then it gets recommended again, and it gets recommended again. So I think I just got lucky with the timing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's basically like my chapter or my story didn't get recommended on Reddit, I think, until maybe like chapter 17. So it it wasn't right away thing. It took a long time, and like Petri said, once it did get recommended, it just continued cycling through there. Like, they do circle they I don't know if that's a good thing and a bad thing, but they do often repeat recs on Reddit over and over and over again. And but that's I attribute a lot of its popularity to that, because before that, I mean, I did have readers, of course, but like it really blew up after. So yeah, there's really not one equation, I don't think. Obviously Harry centric stories tend to get more views. Certain pairings tend to get more views, but like it's really just time, place, it's hard to kind of predict.
Well, that's probably part of why Grow Young with Me is considered like the OC story, because everybody likes Abby for one, but like with Harry-centric stories, like a lot of people, often myself included, are there for the. I'm not saying that. A lot of people are there for the pairing, and a lot of people are there for people they know. So when it comes to OCs, it gets harder for a couple of reasons. One, because that's just not what people are searching for, so it's harder for it to come across people's screens. And for two, like OCs are hard to do, because with the other canon characters, with the exclusion of Daphne, and you've got this whole fanon side to things. If you want to lean into that with her, you have to make a person out of nothing, or I mean, parts of yourself, but you have to just make it, and often that doesn't work out. So you've also got sort of that bias going in. People are like, oh, it's their own character. So especially with OCs, like word of mouth is kind of king, because you're not going to get a lot of just goodwill from a pairing or something like that.
I think a good bit of it too, like with fan fiction, is that there's so many fan fictions that get started and don't get finished that there's a lot of people that are like, I want to be careful about reading stories because I'm concerned they're going to get dropped, or the author's going to, get 50K and kind of finish their world building, and then they stop updating because they don't actually have a plot for their story. So, constantly frequent updates as well. People will read things just because it is being updated. It's still fresh in their mind for when it's been updated recently. And, they'll continue to go. Plus, I mean, the native result, if you go on fanfiction and search, is updated by. And then as a story gains popularity, I mean, people will search by follows, by favorites. They'll put in, the pairing that they want, and they'll search by follows or favorites or updated recently and over this many words. And kind of as you start hitting the longer numbers, and that's who it all kind of builds and builds and builds.
That's very true. There are noticeable milestone like view jumps when you hit those searchable word count numbers, 50K, 100K, 200K. Like I noticed big view jumps when I hit those. So longevity is another part of it, and reliability, of course. But yeah, just there is a huge element of luck of the draw when you show up on the front page, as most recently updated, as part of it. I see it often is talked about on Reddit mostly, is like best time to upload. Like there's a legitimate like kind of bad time of the day to upload to get views.
Yeah, I think popularity as a whole is a hard metric to pin down. I think also, as a lot of people said, the climate to what's going on. I mean, I remember when I first started reading, it was basically populated all by Hinny stories. And I think as time goes on, the views as a whole kind of shift towards other pairings. So I definitely think, how you structure your story just from the outset is probably a bit indicative of how it's going to turn out. Obviously, more niche pairings aren't really going to come across the eyes of too many people.
That's why Tal being successful is amazing, because I talked about that Venn diagram. She's on none of them. She has an OC, which is popularity kryptonite, and she takes forever to update. But still, here we are.
Well, I mean, like I was telling Liberty, I think that you also have to take into account that because it takes long to upload, people do read it more in between to refresh their memories. So that could also contribute to higher views and stuff.
That sounds like
it's a strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
an excuse turned into a strategy.
If you can define
I will neither
genre,
confirm nor deny. What's up?
Ajax, I can't stress this enough. Just define the genre. Then the views come rolling in.
That's all you gotta do, yeah.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
I got more people doing it, and I'm just kidding.
So, our advice to everyone: write the best. Sorry, what are the questions? How well do you believe fanfiction prepares you for the jump to original works?
Okay, I'm gonna go first. I have no idea because this is my first story I'm written, and I've done a little bit of Tal now,
Here,
so I have no
Lib,
idea at
Lib
all.
wants to write
0.
original works. Go for it, mate.
Oh yeah. I would say, based on my, as I've said, just a lot of research that I've done, is it helps more than it hinders, but it does hinder. There are certain conventions to fan fiction that don't quite fly in original fiction, and some of those are invisible. Now, if you're writing, like we talked about earlier, the instantly top level Harry, and stuff like that, when it comes to original fiction like that, absolutely doesn't work because nobody cares about your character. People read those Harry Potter stories because they care about Harry, and they want to um they want to see him just laugh his way through all of the bad guys. That's not the case with original fiction. The more sort of, I think, insidious hindrance is world building. We have the luxury as fan fiction writers to pick and choose what we world build, and the rest of the world already exists there, and our readers know about it already. So, if you don't have to explain wands if you don't want to, you don't have to explain the unforgivables if you don't want to. But and have your characters use both things and your reader knows what it is. But if you do something like that with your magic system in an original fiction, it's nonsense. They don't know what's going on. The way it helps, more than anything, obviously, is just practice. Character voice, dialogue, even the parts of the world that you do flesh out. Like for me, it was like the Velo lore that I got to kind of build for mine. That was a lot of fun. You kind of see what comes into play when writing a story and building a world. And the practice of it is more valuable than any hindrance you're gonna get from it being fan fiction.
Yeah, for me, it's just I would have before I wrote Intent, before I started it, stories in general, coming up with a plot, character progression, having it all make sense, building drama. That was all. I had no concept of that in my mind. I don't know how anyone does that. That's what I was thinking. But the fact that I was able to do it uh, to some extent and was able to do it again uh, with another story, the confidence that builds and the muscle memory. Um, Again, 2 years ago, if you'd asked me if I could write a novel, I would have laughed in your face. Now, if I actually had a good idea that I came up with, I think I could do it. I don't know if it'd be any good, but I'm much further along than I was 2
I'm
years
sure
ago.
it'd be
That's for
good.
sure. Thank you, Tal.
Define the novel genre.
Extremely good, or just good? Because that's a little
Well,
lower than your other praise, so I'm a little worried.
we'll have to wait and see.
Oh,
I'm
fine.
guessing good at least.
That's fair.
Fine.
Sal, did you finish your thought from before?
Which one?
I don't know. I thought Ajax cut you off, but
No, I
No,
think
I
it was
mean
him saying he didn't know.
the
you
only
just
thing, the only
oh,
thing about fan fiction is versus that is just, I mean, I don't know for one because I've never written original. I haven't really considered it yet. But like writing fan fiction, at least for me, I'm just mostly just publishing an ongoing work. So if you're writing an original work, you're going to complete the entire thing, then go and re-edit through and change a whole lot of things. Like that's what I would do if I was finished ITT and I was trying to make an original, an original work. I would change massive amounts of it and edit it. So the process of writing it is like just an ongoing rough draft. So it's kind of a bit dissimilar to me. Whereas for my work business, if I'm writing a report for somebody, it's 50 or 100 pages. I don't just submit every section when it's done to somebody. I mean, you write the entire thing and then you go redo the entire thing. So to me, it's going to be very, very different.
Yeah, I do think, definitely agree with the idea that world building is so much harder, obviously, in original fiction. We don't have to do as nearly as much work. But I do think that it obviously helps with, technical skills, learning, what, just the basic things that we've been talking about with dialogue and character voice and all that stuff. Where I think it does hinder is um, that the nature of fan fiction is so much different than original writing for the very reason that, it is, we post in a serial manner. Like it's one, you don't do that. You don't get feedback from an audience when you write a book, you like in the middle of the story. And sometimes that feedback, it does have potential to maybe make you second guess yourself or maybe change direction in a way that you hadn't planned. And, ideally you shouldn't do that, but it can happen. And at the same time, like Sal was saying, it's very unedited. And I mean, you can see by the length of most fan fiction stories that they're much longer than even the Harry Potter books themselves. So, like, it's the nature of writing in a serial fashion that it's going to be really long because you're posting these chapters like every few weeks or months or whatever. And it just keeps getting longer and longer. Um, I do this, my story is way longer than it should be. And I know that, and I know that's also a criticism. And, there are scenes that should have been edited out, but it's like, it's fan fiction and you learn as you go. But it's definitely a huge difference with original writing and fan fiction, but it is also a great practice at the same time.
All right, has anyone got anything else to say on the matter? All right, well then moving on from that, what would you say the pros and cons are of popularity in fan fiction?
I couldn't say.
Yeah, you could. Everyone could here.
So one of the pros is talking to other authors who say I couldn't say when asked that question because it feels really good. If I'm being honest, that's a joke. That's just a joke.
Just like flat out. Yeah.
I don't. It's weird hearing being described that way. I don't have any cons. I don't know if you guys do.
um, I can go.
She's got some cons. Let's hear it.
Oh, the humility. Here we go.
Obviously there are pros. I mean, you're getting a lot of people reading your story. That's amazing. That's why you write, is to get feedback and to have people react to your story. I'm not going to pretend that's not a really, really good feeling. And getting reviews, it's always nice, of course. I would say some of the cons obviously comes with the more people are reading your story or the more people are expecting of your story, the more first you get reactions from people who maybe would have never touched your story to begin with. So people who won't necessarily read a romance are reading your story, or people that do, and they just, they're much more vocal about their criticisms, as if like, you know, um, I invited them to be open about it since it is so popular, like as if I expected that, if as if I expect it's perfect, which I don't. I very much know that it's not, but people are very open about pointing things out, and it's comes with the territory, and it's not like, it's definitely a way to help you grow. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, I would say I could see that from your perspective because one of the things when I was writing Intent, I mentioned that I was able to put out the chapters relatively quickly. And when I got to the end, that was a tremendous benefit because I could see if I got to the last 5 chapters and it was 3 months, 4 months between updates, not only do you have the external factors, people asking, where's the update? Where's the update? You're putting pressure on yourself, I'm guessing, too, right? That
Oh
gives you
yeah.
3 more months to think about it, whereas I just barreled through that, thankfully.
So the reviews and PMs are definitely a boon and a con as well. Ajax and I have sort of talked about the ridiculous reviews that we get and PMs all from this really really salty reviewer named Guest.
I know him.
Yeah, he's all over the place, reads everything, but and he hates it all. But so there are those which are never any fun, and the more visible your story is, just the more likely you are to get those. Now, luckily, those are few and far between, but they are not fun at the best of times, and pretty painful at the worst of times. And there is a bit of pressure, just from the expectation, even if uh, um, even if people are being polite and even if people are being kind. We joke about the next chapter win reviews and stuff like that, or people just saying, "Hey, I love your story. I can't wait for the next chapter." And when you're a member of Hiatus Gang and it's been 8 months since your last chapter, you're kind of like, "Oh man." And then, at least in my case, there's and Hope and Healing, there's sort of an aspect to it that talks to certain people, which was the point. But sort of leaving those people hanging never feels great either. So there's a lot of I guess pressure that comes externally and internally when you are a little bit more visible than maybe the smaller, lesser known. That sounds conceited, but yeah, the smaller fics.
Peons of
We
fiction,
understand
as you
that.
say.
The peons.
It's funny because from a review perspective, they've never really bothered me, the negative ones, because Tal touched on it on her own stories. The criticisms that I get are the criticisms that I agree with, right? The weaknesses in the story or why it doesn't appeal to someone. When I see that in a review, I get it. I get why they didn't like it because of X, Y, and Z. And I don't know why, but the crazy ones, the ones that just go off for no reason, I just laugh and move on. I remember
Yeah, those
once.
tend to be funnier. Yeah.
I remember once. I think it was about 3 chapters 9 and 10, and I literally got 3 or 4 reviews right in a row that all said, "Your pacing is unbelievable. I love how you keep growing it, and it just keeps moving." And then the next one was, "Is anything going to happen in this story? I feel like I've read nothing for 9 chapters." So again, what can you do with that? I'm not going to listen to that guy. And if somebody says I use too many adverbs and I use the word brilliant too much, you know what? You're right. And I already know that. So it's hard not to put pressure on yourself. And like you guys said, it's hard when you put the pressure on. The way I dealt with it was just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Thank heavens. Because I could see the pressure if there's a long gap. Sal, you're probably feeling some pressure, aren't you? I mean, or not? Or can you?
Oh yeah.
I'm at
Yeah.
like this is definitely the longest I've not updated in quite some time. Like I was just at least once a month, if not more. Probably I think my first year publishing like 2.5 chapters a month, like 25,000 words. So yeah, generally no major breaks, but this time I'm definitely part of the hiatus gang at the moment. I mean, I've been writing a little bit with Tal, but you don't know the ITT. But that's just my personal life is really busy and work's busy, and I knew I had some studying to do for an exam and things like that were coming up. So like I knew it was going to happen, so I just put out a bunch of chapters real quick to get rid of the cliffhanger, and then now I feel pretty comfortable just sitting here. Like if I don't update towards January because I'm really busy with my personal life, then like that's just life. Life gets busy sometimes, and fan fiction to me is a hobby. So if people get really upset and really salty about it, like it's a hobby, guys. Like if I stop playing tennis or stop playing hockey or something, like it's a hobby. Like that's my personal choice. I mean, I'm gonna
Don't
finish my
stop playing
story.
tennis.
Yeah, don't stop playing tennis. Yeah, but like to me, there's not a lot of pressure because it's a hobby. Like I understand people really want to see it, and the most pressure I feel is like I personally want to finish my story. So like I want to get back and get jumping into it and stuff, but that's also kind of the reason I'm not writing as much right now, which is as I jump into my story again, I'm going to I have a hard time just like stopping to write. that's kind of an issue sometimes. Like I'm into a scene and it's like I should be in bed an hour ago, and well, what the heck? Let's just give it another hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'll finish this chapter tonight, or I'll finish this scene. And that's just not something I can do at the moment. So it kind of doesn't really bother me too much. I mean, the negative reviews and stuff. I mean, I saw a lot of negative reviews, and I just kind of laugh, like, okay, yeah. I mean, I have my story's got like probably 20 continuity issues that I'm personally aware of, and I see another review for it, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, cool, thanks. You're pretty, you've seen it, like one of the other 10 people that have seen it, so that's cool. And that's just kind of it for me because it's my first story, and I'm not really too worried about it. Like I'm going to have tons and tons of mistakes. It's like 500 something thousand words now. Like it could probably lose over half of them and be a lot better for it. So I'm just learning. So I'm not really going to take it too seriously if people are upset. And sometimes you get the negative reviews, and sometimes people politely scathe you, and good things come from it.
Can you talk more about the politely scathing reviews?
So can I tell you that Sal is the best at taking constructive, honest feedback. That's how we met. That's how we connected, because I was really enjoying his story until there was one specific thing that I thought was not quite as well done as the rest. And I left him a review, politely scathing review, where I gave him compliments on what I liked and explained what I didn't like. And I think within a day, he replied back to me, and we had a great discussion, I would say, Sal, back
Yep.
and forth 6 or 7 times about it. And he said exactly what I said, where I know the weaknesses. He said, "You're right. That wasn't very good." And we talked about it. So be
Yeah, it's
nice.
specific.
Go ahead.
It's specific to like the very beginning of the plot, and it was like one of the characterizations is not very well done at all, and like it's just not. I don't know how else to defend it. Like there is no defending it. It's just straight up not well done. In fact, I haven't read that chapter. Some of those early chapters. Probably there's 50 ITT chapters, and I've probably read, I don't know, maybe a dozen of them in like after writing them, where I've actually read them afterwards. So I don't edit ITT. I just send it to my betas and then I just move on, because to me it's a long rough draft, and I just want to learn how to write. So like I didn't do that part well, so okay, and I've just moved on. And I don't mind taking criticism. I noticed like if other writers specifically are messaging me about like some kind of criticism, I think like I had one probably around like chapter 40. One of the more well-known authors messaged me, and I was like, oh, they said like, I don't like this about your story, and it's like, perfect, thank you for telling me that this is something you don't see. And I talked to them about just asking them different questions so that I can learn from it. So I don't see positive constructive criticism as a problem. I mean, my fiction is seems to be rather popular, but it's definitely not. I'm not the best writer even on the server or on the Flowerpot server, and there's much better technical writers than I am. It just happened to be popular, so I want to just learn as a writer and enjoy my hobby. So getting criticized to me is just, it's a good way to learn. And there's malicious criticism, and those people you just ignore and move on, because they're pretty if you don't like the story, there's no point in making a malicious criticism. Just move on. So that's what I'm going to do if you do that. So it's pretty good. I'm not too worried about that side of things, but like on that side, the criticism and the pressure, just, to me, it's a hobby. I'm not gonna kill myself if I don't play well in a hobby. If I go play hockey one night and I don't do well, I'm just having fun. So that's how I treat fan fiction.
Yeah, and there's definitely, like, if you want to get better, sort of criticism is good. Criticism is necessary, and there can even be criticism like that you can learn from. I hesitate to say this just in case people get the wrong idea, but for example, Ajax and I have our very favorite reviewer of all time, and he talks nonsense, but within that nonsense, the first time that he ever like left me one of those reviews, there was 2 good points. One of which I like Sal said, like one of which I realized and I couldn't do much about, and so I left alone. And the other one was something I could fix. And just because those were good criticisms that I sort of paid attention to doesn't mean I then engaged with his nonsense or then said like, oh, thank you so much or anything like that. Like even the criticism of like this I hate this story, that's not really a criticism. That's obviously, that means this story isn't for you, pal. But even in the kind of rude ones, like I have tried to learn to find something to take away from it. That way it's not totally a waste of my time, but that's kind of a me thing as well.
All right, well, moving on from this and kind of reeling it back in, obviously a big part of fan fiction, especially with the HP community, being tropes. So, as writers, do you feel like we should use tropes?
Let me slide in with another Brandon Sanderson, Mr. Sando, Brando. He points out, and I agree with, is that any cliche stops being a cliche when you do it well enough. The hero's journey is a cliche, and Lord of the Rings is one of the best pieces of literature we've got. And it wasn't even the first. So Harry Potter is well known for certain cliches. And every single one, I would argue, could potentially be done well. Even the insta level up Harry, if he insta levels up and then you knock him back down, or I guess in theory, like match him in some way, then you can, with originality, use it as a base if it's a building block and not the whole structure. Yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah, basically tropes are tropes for a reason. They're popular because people like them and they work in stories. I think it could be very interesting when you subvert tropes and try to do the opposite of what the reader is expecting. But I think if that's your main mission in writing a story, it's going to come off as very, I don't know, not genuine, I guess, and just like as if you're just proving a point. Um, Meta, yeah, as Nas points out in the chat. If that's what you were referring to. But I think in terms of in the more small scale parts of the story, I think cliches, can be avoided. Like in the certain dialogues that you read over and over again, or certain scenes that you read over and over again, I think that's usually where I try to avoid. Which is very hard because romance itself is a story that you've read 1,000 times. It's basically the same formula, but it doesn't mean that it can't be written well or executed well just because you use the same formula or same idea. It's just, yeah, it's about the micro cliches, I guess. Are you going to have Harry say, his main "I love you"? Is it going to be like, oh, I love you more than, I don't know, like a common phrase that you hear in movies all the time or whatever. It's just like I always try to avoid the things that you've read 1,000 times over just because it's boring and it's predictable. But you can't really avoid tropes. It's just natural to have them, and it's not something that you should really aim to not have a trope in your story. Like everything has been written before. It's not possible to create an original idea just at all. So don't make that your mission, really.
Yeah, to piggyback on what she said, what I think happens a lot is people make so many unforced errors in broadcast to the reader that they're following a trope. So, for example, Daphne in my story does follow a lot of the tropes. She's quiet, she's a pureblood, etc., etc. But I made it a point that I would never call her the Ice Queen in the story. I wouldn't have her say it. I wouldn't have someone call her that. I wouldn't refer to it in the narrative because I would be sending a signal, hey, I've just copied something else that's out there. Don't do that. People make those mistakes way too often. At least for me, that takes me out of the story because I know then, okay, you're basically telling me exactly where I'm headed with the story. So don't do that.
Personally called out.
You could still head that way, but just disguise it a little by not calling her that. You did it really well, though.
Yeah, it's all about execution.
Here's this whole point, except for yours.
No, it really is all about execution. You could write this. You could write the most cliche, line, trope, whatever, and it's all about how you do it than what you're writing.
Yeah, that's true. I guess to illustrate what Petrie is pointing out is like he never said it, and I personally like the Ice Queen is absolutely my junk food. Um, I've got the most tolerance for it out of any fic. I'm a super picky reader. And so long as like grammar and dialogue is good, which is sometimes a big ask in fan fiction, like I've got all the time in the world for the Ice Queen. And I did only mention it once, and she mentioned it herself, referencing rumors about her. But it does fit with her characterization and the way other people would probably perceive her. But you as the reader also know why they see her that way. And so I think that might be why I guess got away with it with Petrie, is that yeah, she was based off an Ice Queen. I wanted to write an Ice Queen story, but I wanted it to make sense. Internal consistency is a huge key, and I wanted to write an Ice Queen that had a reason why she was, beyond just that, like, surprise, that's her personality now.
But you said the other key part, right? You mentioned it once as character building. You didn't have Tracy say, "Oh, look, here comes the Ice Queen. Did you know they call you the Ice Queen?" Hermione explaining to Harry that she's called the Ice Queen and why, and going over and over again. So again, and this speaks to something else we talked about. We're writing what we want to write. There's nothing wrong with putting that in there, because we're all different. And I thought it was really handled well. Liberty, in your story, yours was the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, I mean, tropes you can use them well. Like fan fiction readers have been reading, Harry Potter fan fiction for some people for 10, 20 years. So they're going to see the same tropes over and over, and you can take what their expectations are, lead them towards that conclusion, and then subvert them in a different direction. You can use it to kind of keep their interest that you might be going this way. You leave hints maybe the other way. You kind of bring it back, and then you just go completely somewhere else. And people are like, wow, great work subverting that. I don't know if it's due on purpose, but you certainly can use it as a plot device where readers are going to expect specific things because you've read other fan fiction. And generally these stories go this direction, and you start heading down the way only take a major U-turn. People don't expect that, and that's something you can kind of use and play with. If I was going to write towards a multi relationship, which kind of is what happened, intentionally or unintentionally, just kind of what ended up happening in the writing. I was never going to allow myself to write it where it's just like, I don't know, I don't want to name any fictions, but like there's specific ones I can think of right now where it's like every chapter feels like they add another woman into the harem, or like into the multi, everybody loves each other relationship they have, whatever they want to call it. And like that, if you write that really well and you develop the characters, it can be done well. But if you write it with just one character, and then they have the main person with Harry, and then every chapter there's this new person that there's a sex scene with, it's like, this isn't really a story anymore. This is just somebody that's getting wish fulfillment. So, tropes exist for a reason. Sometimes they're just horrible things, and other times, you can do good things. As long as the writing is strong, it can work well.
Well, would you say in the pursuit of writing tropes that you should try and subvert them?
This is something I kind of touched on briefly. I think there's definitely sometimes a charm to it, going in a direction where the reader's like, whoa, I didn't expect that. And it could even be funny sometimes, or it could be just really like just a good, genuine direction for the plot. But I think that at the same time, you shouldn't overdo it, because then it's like you're trying too hard. You're trying too hard to be unique or something, and it's like, you don't have to do that. It's not natural the way these characters are acting anymore. Just things are popular because they're sometimes just true, and that's how you have to write characters. I don't think it's possible to subvert every single trope, but like I said, it could also work sometimes in a good direction. I unfortunately can't think of a specific example right now, but yeah, I think it could work, but don't overdo it.
Yeah, I
I would-
think. Fuck.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, AJ.
I think probably I can't think of an example either, but there are quite a few tropes that are sort of enshrined in human nature. And if you subvert those, well, if you can't follow your character through that, then your story falls apart. So I definitely think, as a whole, subverting tropes for the sake of subverting tropes is probably one of the worst tropes.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all about keeping your reader in the story. And if you're going out of your way to like lead them in a direction and then switch it up on them, it's going to pull them out. And at the very, very end of the day, ideally, somebody reads your story and has a good time and kind of loses themselves in it. And if you're constantly like giving them whiplash, that's not going to happen. And something that might lead us into the next point. I'm not sure what the next point is. I should probably have the document up, but I don't. Especially in the subject of tropes and what has been mentioned a couple of times is like you're, especially with fan fiction and with writing, really, you're doing it because it's fun. So number one, you shouldn't sit down to write fan fiction and then hear us say like, avoid the tropes, avoid the standards, and then go, oh, well, crap, I guess I'm not going to be doing this. It should be fun for you first. And then, depending on the way you want to approach it is how you take into account these tropes, because people do sit down, and it was something I kind of had to learn when I first started, I guess, like joining in to the author community, was, boy, howdy, do people write for different reasons. And some people really just write to like play in the sandbox of a specific trope. And that's kind of what teleology was for me, is to understand that. And yeah, if you want to sit down and just write a tropey little thing just to have some fun, just do it.
That probably does
So
lead.
just real quick, with subverting tropes, I was trying to think of one, and I thought of one. So anyone who's read a Daphne Harry story knows what happens with the Weasleys when they start dating or are interested. Ron calls her a slimy stink. Ginny starts dosing Harry with love potions, right? That's essentially what happens with the help of his mother. So the subversion I had was, it was 6 year, and I don't think Ginny would do that. In canon, she wouldn't do that. She's dating someone else. So, in my opinion, she would do what Harry did when he was jealous of Dean. He would suck it up. He would look pissed, but he wouldn't say anything. And when he was around Jenny, he would be kind and be nice because she's his friend. And that's what I did with Ginny. And Ron was a bit skeptical, but he saw she was good for Harry. And we went that route. They didn't become enemies. And it was one of the most commented things that I did in the story that people liked because they weren't used to it. And again, doing little things like that makes your story seem original. Just zigging slightly instead of zagging. And somebody mentioned it before. You don't do it with everything. You pick and choose your spot where it makes sense for your characters.
Right, and I think that's a great example too, because with those characters, something I loved is that you didn't go in the completely opposite end of the spectrum where Ginny and Ron are so happy for Harry and they're all on board and one big happy family. You just made it really realistic to the true to their characters, where they're not exactly pleased, but they're not being bashed. It's a perfect, like, realistic medium. So even when subverting tropes, you don't have to do it in the 100% opposite direction. You could just do it kind of somewhere in the middle.
Well, moving on with this, because obviously tropes are a big part of writing. what would your advice be for someone looking to start writing? Or where should someone start?
Read, which is kind of a cliche answer. But I really can't tell you in my amount of time as a beta reader and as an author when I still beta read for people, is I've gotten really, really good at finding ways to tell people politely to pick up a book and open it up. Because people come with giant text walls. Hope and Healing Chapter 1 is guilty of it. The first few chapters of Hope and Healing are very guilty of just exposition heavy, and like when people struggle with dialogue, like the best thing you can do is read. The second best thing you can do is just pick up a book, open it to a page, and see what it looks like. There's there can be too much information out there, but at the absolute most basic level, any published book, it doesn't matter the theme, but for the technical side, just looking at a book can help.
So my advice, especially starting out when you're trying to figure out how you want to write and what you want to write, think of stories you like. But not only think about what you like about them, think about the things that you don't like about them. So my example would be Delenda Est. I think most of the people probably know that story, Harry and Bellatrix. I think it's a great story. I think the relationship between those two is fantastic. The dialogue, fantastic. How they're partners is fantastic. How their relationship love is fantastic. Those and the plotting is great. Those are all the things that I wanted to do. What didn't I like? I personally think it's a bit too long. And I think it got a little top heavy with extra characters near the end, and it kind of ran out of steam. So not only was I thinking about, okay, this is what I want to emulate, but think about these parts. Let's have a contained story. And when I'm saying have a contained story, I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying anyone starting to write, think about what you enjoy reading, because that's what you should really be writing. Ultimately, it should be something you think would enjoy reading. I'll be honest, I enjoy reading back my stories because I wrote them for me. I'm the audience that would like this. And Grow Young with Me is another perfect example. The relationship and the growth of it. And sorry, Tal, but you mentioned it, right? It is a bit long, right?
Yes, it is.
So
definitely.
But everything else in that story, I think, is perfect. And again, what Grow Young with Me told me, I don't need to have, dramatic battles to tell a story. In fact, it's better for not having that because you set a clear focus for what you want to tell.
Yeah, that's basically exactly what I would say is you have to write what you would want to read. That's basically why I started both of my stories in the first place, is because I was reading a lot of fan fiction. I just was looking for some kind of good romance. I found it in a lot of places, but I also just really wanted something, more, I guess, in some other places. So, yeah, it's all about, it should be something that you would or just really want to pick up and read. That's basically the best advice I can give. If you're getting bored by what you're writing, then other people are going to get bored. Anytime I feel like I'm writing a scene and I'm just bored, I just cut it immediately because I'm like, okay, what's the point of this? There should always be a point to every scene. This is something that I've had to learn along the way. Like, I keep saying my story's too long, and that's a fact. I should have cut a lot of scenes, but that's okay. That's why you go through, you get better and better at these things. You start to recognize more of what's necessary and what's unnecessary. But yeah, it's just about really being excited about what you are writing.
I also think it's important not to lose yourself in pursuit of originality, because when you're starting out, you're going to talk like everyone else until you can find your own voice. And I think that's particularly important to recognize when you're starting, because we all steal at some point. That's not necessarily something to be ashamed of, but trying to launch yourself into the deep end, while it sounds good on paper, probably isn't the best habit to develop. So I would definitely suggest easing in with something you know, rather than trying to figure out something you don't.
So you're saying don't start with a massive world building fic where Harry has 3 potential love interests and learns magic from Salazar Slytherin. You're saying maybe that might be a little bit too big to start with. Is that what you're saying?
Now, well, I think that feels a bit targeted, but
No, it's a compliment. It's a compliment because I certainly couldn't do it.
Anything to say to that, Sal?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started writing, it was just I had no idea how long my story was going to be or what was going to happen. I mean, I knew the plot ideas that I had, but I've never. I feel like I'm probably one of the most inexperienced people to like start trying to do writing fan fiction, where like I had zero interest in creative writing growing up, like entirely zero. My worst grades were always in English because in literature classes because I just frankly did my best to not attend, to not learn, and to not pay attention. I was quite good at it. In fact, I don't think I read a single book that I was assigned to read in high school. No, I definitely didn't. So I mean, that was how interested I was in English class and like creative writing, and I just had zero interest in it. So coming into it for me, I was just trying to explore this idea of writing and just doing it. And doing is a good way of starting to figure out one if you like it, and if you do like it, I don't have no idea what I might be good at or what I might not be good at with it. I took a lot of criticism very early on. In fact, I started doing some beta work for somebody specifically for the idea that if I'm learning the beta side of it, I can ask them questions about why they're doing things and like how they're writing and just learn by doing beta was just to learn. So that was good. And I asked them like their opinion of my story and they just like, they butchered it. Like, this is bad. This is horrible. This is bad. And I'm just saying, I'm copying and pasting the chat transcript into like my own notes to be like, great, more, tell me what else sucks. Like, this is good. That's what I remember thinking, that, you're going to need to learn how to take constructive feedback because you're going to need to come into an understanding you're not going to be very good. I mean, very few people are, pick up a new hobby and are great at it naturally without any problems. So expect some criticism, but mostly, worry about just enjoying yourself, writing for yourself. And, if you can enjoy reading what you've written, I think you're doing exactly what you should be doing. If you like it, there's a good chance other people will try and like it. And, that's probably the biggest thing.
And I think, just can I follow up on that real quick? Because I think Sal's being a little humble where he said, I just do it for fun and it's just a hobby. But the core of what I heard when you were talking was, even though it's a hobby, you want it to be good and you're trying to get better and you're trying to learn and keep improving as you go along. I'll never forget, I was about 8 chapters in to Intent and somebody PM'd me on fan fiction and said, how are you getting all these views? What can you tell me? How can you help? What can I do for my story because it's not getting views? So I called it up, and the first thing I noticed was in the summary had 2 misspellings, and it ended with, I suck at summaries, just read. So I, I emailed them back or DM'd them back. I said, well, first of all, make a good summary, because if I read that politely, I said this politely, scathingly, I wouldn't read that. And if you're telling me you suck at summaries, I'm probably not going to read it because you didn't take enough time to do that. They thanked me, went away. I made a note and checked 6 months later, and it's the exact same thing. And guess what? It doesn't have very many views left. So keep trying, keep learning. That's the key.
Well, and what I was going to say is also sort of piggybacking off Sal is everybody here probably doesn't much like their first chapters, especially anybody that posts as they write.
Mine's fantastic, just for the record.
So capital
work of art. Anyways, go ahead.
Capital I Intent is a different beast altogether. And so if you sit down, like, keep in mind that writing is a skill, and like Petrie said, like building muscle memory for telling the story you're trying to tell. The first chapters probably aren't going to be great, and that's fine. Honestly, it is, because and sometimes you just have to start somewhere. the rewrite of Hope and Healing, Ajax has mercilessly destroyed me on how I started the first chapter of the rewrite, because I just needed to put something down, because I needed to get myself as the narrator into the world, and a lot of times that's what, as a new writer, that's what your first chapter will be you figuring out the world, and that can be a little clunky. So it's worth keeping with for more than just 1 or 2 chapters, just because you don't really know. Like there's a early on, there's a period of significant growth quickly, but you gotta at least get there.
Would anyone else like to say anything?
Did you give
If not,
advice, Ajax?
Yeah, I did. About well, now I've forgotten it, so this looks good.
You don't have to
I wasn't
repeat
listening.
it. It's already been recorded.
Ajax, your advice was really good. I'm sorry not everybody was listening, but
I
Ah,
was
it was really
listening.
helpful. Thank you.
I don't remember,
you.
but I
Both
was
of us that
listening.
cared were listening.
I'll hurry up so you can't hear my sobs. In the interest of brevity, I think we'll skip down to the community Q&A. First question: how do you stay motivated while writing?
Stubbornness.
You take hiatuses.
The silence is telling.
So Tal's answer was you don't.
Basically. Well, okay, yeah, I've taken long breaks, obviously, and it's fan fiction. You're not getting paid for this. I think it's completely okay to take breaks. But sometimes it's necessary to, maybe you're burnt out and you just need a creative break and you come back, you always do come back eventually. And if you don't, like my first story I abandoned. I won't mention anything about going back to it just yet, but sometimes you abandon a story
Ooh,
and
that
that's
sounds
okay.
exciting, Tal.
Well,
A little tease. I like that.
I'm keeping my lips sealed for now, but I will say one thing that I do like to do to help me get into the mood and kind of motivate myself is I really like to listen to music, and sometimes a song will, make me in a certain emotion or mood, or I can picture a scene. I like to relate music to scenes a lot. That's something I do, just a tiny little thing that can help me get motivated to like write. But other than that, yeah, I just take breaks basically.
The other thing that helps, I think, if you're not motivated to write your own story, writing smaller pieces, writing one shots, writing one offs really helps me, because there's no pressure, there's no stakes in this. It's its own thing. And again, I'm working that muscle. And I think Sal-Tal, you probably have a lot of that, even though
Oh
your
yeah.
chapters are epically long in Healer Harry. I could feel the enthusiasm over Discord when you guys are writing it, how much fun you're having, right?
Oh yeah.
A lot of
Yeah, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, Sal, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, for the collaboration stuff, when we're writing the either Harry specifically, I mean, it's a very different style of writing. I mean, we're just kind of making fun of things, and if it's a really stupid idea that sounds kind of great, then we just throw it in there and figure out a way to make it work. I mean, it's a bit of a crack fic, troll fic, meta fic, so it's just a fair bit different than writing a long story that's been going on with needs a lot of internal consistency. You just kind of make fun of yourself, make fun of your characters, just enjoy yourself. But for my ICT story, I don't know. Maybe it's a little different. I mean, my update schedule was pretty good. I didn't want to let it until I recently with the Hiatus Gang, when Liberty got me to join it. I wanted to make sure that I
You're
wanted to
welcome,
keep
everybody.
putting out. Yeah, exactly. I want to keep putting out stories regularly, because my worry was that once I kind of stopped and I let like a 2-week gap become a 3-week gap, or 3 weeks become 4, that 4 becomes 5 and 5 becomes 6, and eventually it's like I feel like I'm not getting stuff done. So I try to set a pretty like consistent, even if I'm not in the greatest mood to write. Sometimes just try and even just put some words down, 50 or 100 or 200, because even if you can just kind of force yourself to do that on days where you're not writing very well, or you're just not really into the mood as much. If you do that 2-3 days in a row, well, 2, 3, 400, 500 words. I mean, suddenly over 4 days, that's 2,000 words you put into a chapter. It's a fair bit. So most of the time, I did that when I'm writing well, or this, have a scene really in my head, or things are going, then I just try and continue. So for me, writing at night, where like the other end of things is going to be sleep. So I just, start writing until I'm going to go to sleep, and sometimes the scene's writing is going well, so I'll go for multiple hours. And I've written entire scenes, entire chapters, 10, 12, 15,000 words in a day before, because it's going well. So when it's going well, just keep it going. But I also took specific days off. If I post a chapter, I don't write anything for 24 hours, 48 hours most of the time, because I don't want to get burnt out and just go, 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 go. And sometimes, if I put out two chapters in a row, like I did 2 chapters in one day, then I just took 3, 4 days off instead, just to make sure that I just had a chance to just read, relax, do other things, because, just constantly pumping out content would, at least it would burn me out.
Yeah, sort of in line with Sal and what Tal was saying. Like, I joked about stubbornness being my thing, but that's really pretty much it. Is I have trouble if I don't have a habit of it. So, like, I'm very precious of my writing habit and making sure that I get something down every single day. Um, like it's getting better, because a couple weeks ago I took like an 8-day break and didn't fall apart, so that was nice. Um, but yeah, there are times when you need a break, and Hope and Healing was stalling, and made the shift to Hope and Hiatus. And then like being able to switch to teleology, which wasn't as I wasn't as emotionally invested in it, and it wasn't as deep, and there wasn't as much world building, and I got that done in 13 days, just because it was so much fun to be doing something else. Um, so yeah, sometimes the best way to motivate yourself to write is to either write something else or don't. Because if you really force it out all the time, you are going to probably put out something you're not very happy with, and that's going to be detrimental rather than um, a good thing.
Anyone else?
What about you? Unless I missed it again.
Well, I don't stay motivated. That's my trick. Moving on. What is your process for editing? Do you write a rough draft and then clean it up, or essentially rewrite it as soon as it's done before you release it? Do you have an editing process at all?
Petrie, I'm really curious about yours, because you said you updated super regularly when you were releasing Capital I Intent.
Very good. See, so I'm not at the same pace I was there, but it's funny because I have the exact opposite method as Sal. Where that's the other thing to take away from this. There is no one way to do it, because I sit down and really in intent. This is what would happen. I would write the chapter out in the day, put it aside until the next day, and then I would go through it 1, 2, 3 times, as many times as I could. And I think, unlike most people who are adding things, I'm rewording and taking things out. So I get it all out, and then I edit and re-edit and re-edit, and then I put it up, and then I get a review 2 minutes later telling me of a typo, and it drives me insane, and then I go update it again. So I go over it at least, I want to say at least 5 times, and that's before the spell check, Grammarly, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I've kind of similar to Petrie is, but also very different. For a majority of growing with me, what I would do was edit as I went, which is really a horrible thing to do, and I don't recommend it. But I couldn't help myself. And I would write a scene and then I'd make sure it was perfect before moving on to the next one. But that would really slow the process down and it would be really frustrating. But I just it was so hard for me to get out of that habit. But for this last chapter, and this is actually something I can attribute to writing with Sal, what I was learning how to do is just free writing. Just, whatever comes out, don't even look at it, just keep going. And then going back and editing. And that's what I did for this last chapter, that for GYM that I posted, is I would literally just write like anything every day, like how Sal does. One time it was literally 7 words one day, and Liberty likes
Beat me to
Liberty likes to always bring this up. But yeah, there was literally a day I just wrote 7 words, but I'm like, I just have to open the doc every day. And then after that, I would just edit. I would start from the top and just edit. Like I'm really, really intense about editing. Something, it's not really a healthy thing. Naz, who's listening in, has watched me do this, and Sal. Well, of course, Sal's watched me do this, but he's probably used to it by now. Like I will literally spend, I don't know how many minutes on one single sentence until I can move on, and it's just it's frustrating, and I wish I didn't do that, but I do. I think there's a happy medium to find that might be too intense. I've also, like, this is the first time I used a beta, so I think maybe I need to depend more on using a beta. But that's kind of a learning process for me. But yeah, that's kind of been my process basically has changed, and I've tried to fall out of bad habits.
I'd like to talk about betas at the end too, but my process.
Just real quick, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Liberty. Can we be clear? Naus is Tal's beta because he's complaining in chat, so everyone knows.
I've mentioned him like
Naus
3
is
times
Tal's
already.
new beta. I'm sorry, Liberty. Go ahead. I apologize, but go ahead now.
That's okay. He deserves the recognition he's due.
Does he though?
Yes.
Anyways, go ahead.
Sure as
Oh man, that's 4 against 1. No, so I'm trying my best. So Christ. So I've made a big conversion in my time writing. Hope and Healing originally was like entirely discovery written, beyond a few scenes that I had in mind. Editing was beta based mostly. I'd give it a single pass because it felt a little disrespectful to just send the total shit that I had to somebody to look over, because I like my rough drafts are really, really rough, and that's gotten better as I've gotten better. Triage often complains that I don't leave her much to do anymore, and that kind of comes from the muscle memory and looking for, like, my big weakness was repetitive words, so I learned to pick that out. Still happens, but I'm better. And then with one of the things I tried with teleology was, 1, I tried out a full outline, and for 2, I tried full write and then edit. And there I found so much value in editing after it was all done. The other thing that I did was finish it first. And one thing that I could do in that, there's like 3 or 4 scenes that were added in to kind of shore up problems that I had. And so editing after I was done was a huge benefit, and it's something I carried into the rewrite. When I send the chapters out for beta, either in the Flowerpot server or to my regular betas, I haven't looked at them again in that form, because in their like notation form, because I will start to edit, kind of like Tal said, like I cannot help myself. I was particularly proud of an early chapter one night, so I went back to read it, and I ended up just like spending all the time editing instead. So I'm saving it for a total revision when I go through the whole thing, and hopefully that'll work out, but we'll see. No. So Tal put in chat, like, one example legitimately that made it into the actual original Hope and Healing was I used gently twice in the same sentence. So you know, things happen.
To
Things
everyone.
happen, and betas don't catch everything. And you're probably get used to putting out an imperfect product because you'll always find something to nitpick eventually. But I think my advice to editing would be to try different things, because something's going to work better for you. Don't necessarily think the first thing you try is, or the first thing you hear is the best way.
I think personally, my editing process is usually I write the chapter, and then pretty much everything other than dialogue is good, and then I sit and slave over dialogue for an extra 2 weeks because I'm not great at it. So personally, most of my time is invested in trying to fix up the holes in the ship rather than letting it sink.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. My dialogue is fine, but I really spend so much time on the prose and exposition.
100% the
Sal.
same. Yeah. So what you're hearing again is 5 different approaches to do everything. So hopefully we've confused you, but the word that keeps being thrown out there is try. Try, do it, and figure out your own process. And don't settle.
You could go the ITT route, which is just simply don't edit. You just create
See,
it
there's another
and
method.
hit send. But I mean, it's a little different because I knew it's my first story that I have no expectation that's going to be like clean documents. Like I'm going to miss things. Like I forgot your and your were different with the apostrophe and none. Like I never use that in business writing. You do not write the other one. You just write. There's only one proper correct usage. So that's all I ever did, and I just kind of forgot because it'd been so long because I'd written a different way. So that just happened. So I learned and I just moved on, and I expected that probably every so often there'd be an obvious difference in my writing where I'd learn to get better. So for me to I have the idea that I'm going to go and edit things means I'm going to continue to go back and fix things. And I didn't want to do that. I don't want to go back and rewrite the first 10 chapters of the story, which are just horrific, because I would just gut them completely, and then I'd make changes that now required me to edit the 11 to 20, and then by the time I finish 11 to 20, it's just going to continue to be edited and edited, and every time I move forward, it's going to happen. So for me, I'm going to be putting out a rough draft, and that was my mindset from the beginning, and that's what I do on important scenes. I will check over them, but again, that's pretty rare that I do check over them. And even now, I'm going to finish the fiction and probably the final ending chapter, with all the major stuff. I'll probably read that over once and then just send it off. But my next project, which I probably plan to do, assuming my life stays consistent and I have time to write again another one, I'm going to try and write the whole thing in all at once, and then go start editing and go through things, just to see how that process is, because I want to try something different. And the next one I put out, I'll have improved my writing from beginning to end of ITT, and it's at the point where editing will now make a big difference versus writing for me from the beginning to where I am now. Just doing it and learning and getting better has made a huge difference in my writing, and I don't want to keep going back and fixing everything.
Yeah, editing your early chapters very quickly turns into a hellish entire rewrite. Just saying.
Yeah, that's what I don't want to do. It's too long, and there's way too much to rewrite. I already know there's like huge plot changes and stuff I would make early, just like things I would cut, like massive parts, and it's like, no, just don't get involved in that. If I start going down that at all, then I'm going to do it all, because that's kind of the way I am. And so for me, it was either none or all, and I chose none.
And I chose all.
Yep.
Moving on from that, what are your views on the position of small communities in fan fiction and small-scale writing in general?
I was a little confused by this question, to be perfectly honest. Like, in my views, in what way? Like, are they beneficial? Are they bad?
I think Petri.
I think I understand the question. Yeah. So I think what they're asking about is things like the subreddits, like the main Harry Potter fan fiction subreddit, the Henny subreddit, the Harmony subreddit, and the Discords. That's kind of how I took the question.
Okay.
And my answer to that is, as far as communities, and you guys can speak to that, we're on one of these channels right now. If you all the topics we've talked about, if you're interested in writing, if you want to get better at writing, if you want help with writing, that's where you get it. Because not only are you with interested people, but everyone here is going to be nice and not be those awful reviewers. They're going to give you maybe criticism, but they're going to encourage you.
That's potentially untrue. I'm just saying.
Well, I don't
Not
know who you
everybody's gonna
hang
be
out
nice.
with. I'm just saying. I think
Yeah.
personally, I guess it's how you treat other people. They're nice to me. That's all I'm saying. But I think it's been great. This Discord, the Harmony one for me personally, they do a lot of prompts, and that's helped my writing immensely. Just getting that muscle going. So I think it's been almost nothing but a positive for me. Reddit, not quite so much, but pretty positive.
I do want to.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I do want to be clear that I was joking about people being nice. It was definitely
Yeah,
just a dig
same.
at Tal. When it comes
Some
Good
to
jokes
idea.
aren't funny, guys. Some jokes aren't funny. Okay.
most
Anyways, go
all
ahead.
of my jokes are funny. The
That's debatable.
the when it actually comes to writing, I mean, I guess partially exampled by the fact that we're here talking about writing for what was supposed to be a half an hour. Is when it actually comes to writing in these communities, like most often you'll find people that are just as passionate or more passionate about it and are willing to help and maybe not willing to help to the degree that you might want. But I probably the most valuable question you could ask is like, what would you tell, like something we've already answered, what would you tell a new writer that can help you avoid pitfalls that really made us stumble. All in all, I agree with Petrie. I think it's good. We're in this Discord right now. We talked earlier before the podcast about me being like completely starstruck when Petrie showed up because I'm a huge fan of capital I intent, and now I'm doing a podcast with him, so that's cool, and by and large a good thing. So as far as the Reddit goes, I'm going to echo Petrie again. It's usually a good thing. Definitely a good thing for visibility, like with Tal's story. But the more community that there is, especially like around ship servers, I know all of them are pretty guilty of it, is you can get exclusionary and you can get, it's where the tropes really get sort of magnified at times. But when it comes to like the actual writing perspective, by and large, I'd say it's a good thing. Immersing yourself around other writers. I would probably say there was a definite uptick in my quality when I just started talking to people. Ajax and I don't like to talk about it, but we're very, very similar writers. But he super excels in prose, like he talked about. He nails it first time, and his first time nailing it is very atmosphere heavy, which is something I really struggle with, and I probably wouldn't have noticed that in my own writing if I hadn't been around, like seeing him get that right first time, and like him saying like, here, can you, the very first time I saw this, he sent me he sent me in chat, like he sent all this, he said, hey, somebody look this over and see what you think and see if the atmosphere is right. And like if I remember right, like I got it down to a T what he was looking for, because that says no, I won't. And because that's his strength. So you're gonna run into people that have different strengths and can give you tips.
Yeah. Sal, go ahead.
I kind of really like the small communities aspects. I mean, I've met other authors on here, and I picked their brains for things I like about their writing. Like somebody likes. I mean, I like something about their stories, and something they do really well that I don't, and I ask them questions. Steel Badger would be an example. I really like his Shadow of Angmar story. I mean, he's generally just a very good writer, and I asked him a whole bunch of questions, and I've asked him a lot of questions, and he's such a nice guy that he took the time to write out multi-paragraph responses and explain things that I had no idea about. So I certainly appreciate it in the small communities. I think you'll see it with the Flower Pot server's got a great beta program going. People put stuff in there and it helps. So I think it's been generally good. I mean, there's some negative things that can come from it with any kind of communities. But generally, for me, it's been a very positive thing. And the writers that I've reached out to try and get some assistance with when I was brand new to everything, most of them responded and were incredibly helpful and gave contact information to email them things or chat directly. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we always talk about how much time we waste on Discord and how that takes away from writing and stuff. But I think in my perspective, since I joined Discord, I haven't written this much in this amount of time since, I don't know, probably my entire life. So it's definitely been a huge motivator for me. Just in terms of like writing extra one shots and collaborating with Sal and stuff. And with the GYM chapter, the most recent one, I honestly, like, if it wasn't for like my three coaches, Petrie, Sal, and Nas, yeah, I would not have gotten this chapter out. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, it's such a huge motivation to have people, like friends, to find the correct community for you, because you're gonna probably go back and forth in different communities and like some and not like others. But I was lucky to find one, thanks to Nas, who invited me to originally a Salient server and now STS. So, but yeah, I think it could be an amazing experience. And just, yeah, I'm glad to be here.
I think as running one, I think it's very beneficial to see that it is a think tank, and also that it kind of breathes.
And what one is that?
creativity into
Which one do you run, Ajax?
the flower pot server. Thank you, Petrie.
Thank you.
He's the owner, as a matter of fact.
And see it kind of breathe the creativity into people, that they have like-minded individuals that want to propel them forward. And I think pretty much across the board in most of the communities I see, that when you put yourself with people that you can agree with and you can have discussion with, it gives you that drive to try and expand yourself. So I think definitely in that regard, it's especially during Discord myself, it's been one of the best parts of it. I've certainly had my influence as a writer, and while I say never meet your heroes, especially any of these ones on this channel, I definitely think it's been a big impact on my writing.
You were all my heroes before I joined Discord, so I was really starstruck to meet you all.
She'd heard of zero of us, as a matter of fact.
So Tal, saying that, let's do a quick roll call. Whose stories have you read here, since you're such a big fan? Just since you threw it out there.
Every person, at least one thing from every person here. So
the 3,000 word one shot, it's included.
Listeners, take that tremendously vague answer and do with it what you will.
And I do want to say something that Ajax kind of touched on, is there's I thought I wanted to say something, but my brain shut off. Having a community to talk to, like Flower Pot server kind of specifically, like it didn't exist before Ajax put it together. And having people to talk to, and this can apply to fan fiction in large, because there's no small amount of people that just don't talk about it, that they're a part of the community in real life. There's a stigma around it, and and like when the Flower Pot server started, like having people to talk to more than like the one or two random people on Reddit, like it was really something. And we put together collections and sold our creative souls to Petrie to get him to join the collection. And but by and large, it's a good thing that people can to be around other people that feel similarly. And when it comes to authors, like, we're all here because we, at least in some capacity, love to do it and are happy to talk about it.
So, and it was really great timing, to be honest, with COVID. Obviously, we're cut off from a lot of people these days. To have the connection here, I think I can just say personally, it's been great to have people and a place to go and engage.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Except Flower Pot. That place is awful.
You're not wrong, but still.
The people are good, but the people who run it, avoid them.
Luckily, I'm not included in that.
Oh.
Anymore. No, yep. Flower Pot's great. They just talk a lot. We love you.
So
I
much.
well, like Petrie said, I think the wow, I'm having troubles now. My proudest part of that server is definitely the beta section. Betas can be hard to get. Good betas even harder to get, and we have a few outstanding people in there, but the like supportive culture around that channel is the most valuable. The like teaching and instructing, and the way they explain. We talked earlier about criticism and getting harsh criticism and trying to get the most out of that, whereas these people are there to help, and can really teach a lot. And that's probably just being a part of the community and learning. You're going to grow so much faster than just stumbling through it yourself.
If we want to progress on from that, question for Sal. What are your recommendations for establishing a date world, specifically like how you did with Salazar's writings?
I think the best way for me to try to answer this is just to talk through kind of how I came up with it, I guess, to some degree, because I'm not sure how I'm going to chat about like world building specifically. I mean, I've only written my stuff, so um, I remember reading in the second book of Harry Potter, and you read the Chamber of Secrets. And I remember when I opened book 3, I was like so excited, like, okay, we saw the Chamber of Secrets, plural. This is going to be good. Like, we're going to see this in future books. And it turns out it's just a storage place for a carcass, so that later in book 7 they can go down there. Apparently, you don't need to be a Parseltongue. You just had to have been around one enough to kind of memorize roughly how they say it, and then you can just go down there and stab things. So that was like the plot point of it, and that was so upsetting to me because it's like this legendary place with like this legendary person, and it's like just complete nothing. Like it's just a plot device for for the book 7. So it really annoyed me. Not seeing it used like book 3 before. I thought book 4 like he would go down and use that place like training space, like it's a huge room, but again nothing. So it kind of annoyed me. And then I kind of thought about like what could it be used for? What could it have been? What could have been the purpose beyond housing a snake? Um, what kind of person would have created this? And then you start thinking about what kind of person you kind of understand in canon the character was, and then like many other things in the Harry Potter world, they're not super fleshed out, and the things you do have are kind of rumors and conjecture from 1,000-year difference. So I started trying to create the character, um, and their history, what happened in their life. You see some of that in their writing, their personal life, but most of it is in my own head that was used to kind of create it. So I wanted to create a space, one that's going to be useful. Like I wasn't just going to send Harry Potter down to the Chamber of Secrets and be like, cool, he drinks this cool potion, powers up, and then moves on. Like it was going to need to be used and be consistent through the entire plot. Otherwise, I didn't want to include it. I just want to have a little gimmick. So I tried to make sure I had a way that it's useful and it's a good space for Harry specifically. That the idea behind his creation it has a purpose, and that purpose is used in the plot as well. So Harry goes down there and then he learns. It's his living space. It becomes a refuge for him away from things, a safe space, a place for him to learn and grow. And the writings of Salazar, those are that was I didn't want to have a portrait that he can chat with. I didn't want that because for me a portrait in there was going to be an issue, because if you find that portrait, what about other portraits? Why doesn't he have Potter portraits or black portraits he can learn from? So I didn't want to include that specific because I would have issues with it in my story for the plot. Like it would break the plot in my opinion. So I wanted something different, and so I created, a system for it of how it was going to work going forward, and then the writings, just kind of took on themselves. You just think of the character like I've imagined his life, and what the final kind of he's come to the end of his life, and he's lived this specific way, and now he wants something, and he's trying to design this, and this is this person that has a very complex nature. They've done horrible things. They've done great things. Their name is going to be reviled and extolled at the same time. They're very complicated. And this person needs to try and give advice to somebody. And in fact, multiple people's. Because, in my opinion, the Chamber of Secrets would not be a secret that was only found by Tom Marvell Riddle, 1,000 years later. Like, there's going to be lots of other Parseltongues that would have been there and they would have searched for this fabled place and would have tried to find it and check it out. So it had to have consistency, in my opinion, through the history of Hogwarts and into the future. So the world building side of it, how did I come up with it? It just feels like you start thinking about 1A, and then what is the consequence of A, B, and then consequence of that. You just kind of keep moving and rolling forward. So that was kind of how that specific plot came to be. I just started thinking about it, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And I wanted it to be something that makes sense, because the Harry Potter one to me does not make sense. And there's specific writings. How do you come up with that? They're definitely not my ethics. They're definitely not my beliefs. They're not my life lessons that I would tell people. Some things that the character says, for me, that's definitely not how I'd want to live my life. But that's why you create a character voice. And if you create a character that you can kind of relate to or understand or get into their head, then, you're just trying to get your mind space into that person, and it continues. So, yeah, that's kind of how the world building for me went. The magic system, same thing. You just kind of want more. If you want more, then create more. Make sure it's consistent, and it can go through that from chapter 1 through chapter 30. But yeah.
You don't want to add anything to that?
I just want to say one thing. So, all listeners who've been listening the whole time, when Sal said, all I do is just start writing, and I write it and I send it off to my betas. So you can clearly see before he starts writing how much time and thought he's put into it. And it's impressive. So don't believe him when he says all he does is spit out the words and hands it off, and somebody else fixes it. It's already there. And my big takeaway from that is it's great to have this idea for the chamber in these diaries, but the next step is, what are the ramifications of that? What are the ripple effects? And what are the ripple effects of the ripple effects? And stories that think those things through and execute on them stand out from the other 99% of the stories that try it and it's only surface level. So don't believe Sal when he says he just puts the word on a page and sends it off. That's all I have to say. Good job, Sal.
Thanks. The funny thing about writing fan fiction, the reason I kind of picked up as a hobby is because at my work I've been doing it for quite a while. I kind of am quite good at what I do now. It's not very difficult mentally. It's not challenging. I just go and do it. It's like, oh, this challenging situation comes up. Oh, well, I've dealt with this 20 times, so this is what we do in these circumstances. It's just experience has grown. So I get kind of bored. So I find my mind wandering. This person is telling me their problems, and I gotta give them expert advice on it, and I'm just mindlessly losing my train of thought listening to this person blab about this issue I've seen before. So I just kind of needed something to kind of occupy my thoughts beyond that. So, when I'm commuting and when I'm bored, well, thinking about fan fiction kind of works.
It's a very loud, long silence that was.
Well, with that question, we'll skip to the last one. Do you intend to continue fanfiction / have any plans for more stories after your large project is finished? And if so, why?
No, the why is a different question.
Oh, well.
I don't like the why question. I don't like that at all. It's like, why would you do that? I don't like it. But anyways, someone can answer. Yeah.
AJ, yeah.
Personally, yes, because I'm very a proselyte to this, so I'm still learning as I go very much. I've got a long way ahead of me, so I'd like to make a few stories before I get anywhere further in life and get the skills that come with it.
Yeah, so for me, I went from thinking I would never write anything to writing intent and thinking I was done, then writing outtakes, and then writing another complete story. And now I have 2 whips and going right now. So who knows? Here's what I will say. It all comes down to the Mattingly walk for me. Mattingly's my dog. If I have ideas when I take my dog on the walk, and the next day I'm still thinking about it and adding it to it, then I'll probably have to write it. So we'll see.
Yeah, before joining Discord, I probably would have said no, that I'm never gonna write something again, just because, like, I mean, I did spend nearly 5 years now on trying to finish Grow Young with Me, and I'm nearly there, but it's taken a while. But now, after joining and doing all these one shots and working with Sal, I definitely know that we're gonna keep doing collabs. Definitely healer, some more Healer Harry, in the near future. Definitely more one shots. And in terms of multi-chapter fix, for now, I don't have any plans, but who knows? Oh, and finishing a memoir.
Good job keeping your mouth shut, like you said you were going to.
Yeah, you said earlier that you weren't going to say anything.
Yeah,
But
whatever.
now you just
it was
said it.
it was one of the incentives. Everybody knows now.
Boy, the passion you have in your voice as you're talking about it, it's really inspiring, Tal.
I'm glad.
Oh,
I'm
it is
trying
going
to
to
convey
be
it as best
amazing.
as I can.
Stay tuned for Timothy Sparkle.
I plan on probably writing another one. I mean, I'm going to finish ITT. It's heading towards the ending. Not immediate future, but it's definitely going to end sometime when I get back to it. It's kind of why this was a nice place for me to stop, because it's kind of heading towards that final arc. So, I'm going to finish that and then probably start another one, solo one, or collaboration ones, or multiple. I don't know. I'm not really too worried. Once I finish my first long pick, if I want to start 3 or 4 and abandon them, then that's not. I kind of feel like that's my prerogative at that point. But not most likely, I'll probably just start one thing or continue doing collabs with Tal, because it's just a lot of fun to write.
Anyone got anything else to say?
Liberty,
Oh.
did you answer?
It was my question, so I wasn't going to answer, but I guess I can.
Go on.
Right now, the answer is no. Hope and Healing's taken up the better part of 3 continuous years for me, and I'd like to put the I think skills that maybe life skills that I've learned from it, being that I can build a habit and ideally, in theory, see something all the way through after 3 years, towards something else, at least for a time. And that's by and large because I don't have any other ideas that really, really call to me. Teleology started as an idea that I wanted to start with 2 characters kind of on opposite sides of an idea, and they kind of meet in the middle. And that idea obviously being that the ends justify the means. And then, but I've not had anything else that really has jumped out at me, and not even for lack of trying. I'd said that because Sal wouldn't stop bullying me about it, I was going to do a Bond fic, but you can't really follow chapter 1 of Healer Harry, so so now I don't have to. So off the hook for that one. And plus, I couldn't get anywhere with it. So my answer is at the moment no. Even with the discords and stuff, I need to have an idea that I guess calls to be. I wish I had something for her, Nas, but I don't. Nas asked if I'd do a Luna one, and I don't have a story to tell with her, and I need that. So yeah, that's a long way to say no, not really.
Well, if anyone else has got anything to add before we finish up.
We need to ask my why question.
Okay, why?
Why do you write the stories? Is there an underlying reason?
That's a deep question.
Wow, that's a lot to take in with that question. So for me, and I think Sal hit on it. I came up with an idea that I'd never seen done, that I didn't think was handled or thought could be handled differently in canon. And the excitement and the joy and getting it on paper and putting it out there and having it all come together. So, in learning a new skill, to be honest, and finding out this is something I enjoy doing. It is a hobby, right? As Sal said, why do you do hobbies? Because you find them enjoyable. And imagine if you, like he said, play tennis, and you took up tennis, and all these people kept commenting every day, "Wow, I really think you're good at tennis. Are you going to play tomorrow? Can I watch tomorrow?" And then they're excited when you're done, and it's good. It's a sense of personal accomplishment, and it's a fascinating world. And I think, as Sal said, J.K. and what she did in canon is the lifeblood of fanfic, because there were so many things that were started and never delved into, and so many characters that their motives can be written in an entirely different way, and it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, for me originally, it was just I wanted to write a story that I would want to read. But I think it grew eventually because of the nature of the story that I write. I get people a lot that tell me that like they've been affected in a certain way by it, or it's made them feel good, or something like that. And
Or
honestly,
feel bad.
or feel bad, or feel really horrible and want to question or have existential dread. But whatever it may be, making a person feel something is incredible. And especially when it's one of my absolute favorite thing to hear is that it provides comfort to a person because it does that for me. I mean, that's another huge reason why I write, is to kind of just, escape the world for a little bit and you focus on something else. And if I can provide that for somebody else, that's a huge plus.
And again, just real quick, there's so many little things, and here's an example, one that I can embarrass Tal again with. There's a joke in the last chapter of Intent. I got a lot of reviews. No one commented on this joke. I personally thought it was the funniest joke in the whole thing, me personally. I'd given up anybody else commenting on it. Tal read it. When she reviewed it, she specifically called out that joke as funny. That was just one little thing that happened that day that made my day, and we talked about it the next day.
Yeah,
And that's a community thing, right?
Yeah.
So you put
And there
something
was
out
going,
there.
yeah,
You put
going
something
off
out
of
there that you write, like she said, you write it for yourself, but you hope other people like it. And then when they give you feedback that they do, and then when it's an author you respect or enjoy their work that they say it's just exponential. So
yeah, definitely. And I was gonna say, the joke that I commented on when me and Sal wrote Edelweiss, which is our FP one shot. Check it out. When we wrote that, I had a line that Petrie's own joke inspired me to write that line. And then when Petrie was reading over the fic, he commented on that specific line and said how he liked
exactly.
it. And I was like, I was inspired by you. So it was a really cool moment.
Edelweiss is unacceptably good.
I think
Yes, the best feedback that we've gotten.
Can we just review? Liberty just said it's unacceptably good. Tal's immediate response was yes.
I can say that because it was a collab fic, okay?
Wow.
I can say that because it's true.
That as well.
the sheer humility in this podcast, gosh.
Right? We're the most humble people,
3 out of 5 genre definers, that'll happen.
Expanding on the why, for me personally, I just felt, one, because I enjoy it, but I also felt like there was a possibility I had a lesson that someone needed to hear. So, I launched myself forward with that idea that if I could write something at the end of the day that someone gained something from, well, then I'd be in the right position.
Yeah, my why was kind of I wanted to create try a different hobby that was what I would consider like a productive hobby. Like writing gives you skills that you can transfer into other things. Like anytime you write something, I mean, my writing is better. Can get my thoughts across better because I have a lot more practice at it. So writing was one of those things that you could take as you sink time into it. When you're done, you have a completed story, or you have picked up a lot of new skills, or you've just learned a lot. I like that versus, you go play a video game or something and, you sink your time into it, or you watch a movie. And at the end of the day, when you're done, what do you personally gain from it, or what personally did you get better at in life, or how did it improve your life or make you better as a person? And
Poning
writing is,
noobs. I get better at poning noobs. Anyways, go ahead.
For me, I like that writing, it gives me life skills, practical skills. There's something when I've spent all this time at the end of it, there's something done. And that, that kind of mattered to me when I was considering writing as a possible hobby to try out, versus other things. So,
Yeah, for me, it was, I asked the question. It started out because I read a story and I thought to myself, I can do better, which a lot of people do. And I hadn't written at that point in 8 years. And after having that thought, I kind of thought to myself, well, can you? Because it's been a while. So I sat down and tried. And then this is the part where Ajax and I are super similar, and we don't like to admit it.
Shut up.
But yeah, especially teleology, not at all. It's just for fun. But hope and healing, there's a number of messages in there, and I think representation that I'd like people to look at, and that I've actually already gotten some feedback on that really sort of blew me away, and that's part of what drives me when I'm not really feeling like I want to write, but and a huge part of what drives the rewrite so strongly is that to be able to properly tell that story, to do what I want it to do. Stupid. To be able to do what I want to do, it's it really pushes me forward. So yeah, there's definitely a reason behind why I want to write, but if I didn't also love it to death, I probably wouldn't do it.
Anyone got anything else they'd like to add?
Before Ajax closes it out, I think we should all probably give him a shout out for setting up the whole charity thing that made this possible.
Shut up.
Nope.
Absolutely. And
Thanks,
getting the
Ajax.
questions and making the
Amazing.
outline and
my
running
gosh.
the podcast.
Unbelievable.
So
I can't even imagine the amount of work that took.
No joke. At
Excellent.
time of recording, we're sitting at $1,600 that a bunch of people that write fan fiction put together, which the goal was $650, and that because of Ajax and the wonderful
Yes.
people in these communities that we're talking about. So now you can finish it up.
All right. And on that note, concluding what did I call it at the start? The 2020 Extra Life Writers Podcast. Thank you for listening.